Seasonal movies are no new invention. An attempt to cash in on society's love of a particular holiday has become commonplace in cinema. Romantic movies for Valentine's Day, family pictures for Christmas. However, there is one season synonymous with alternate cinema: Halloween. The one day of the year that the Western world celebrates the macabre. Trick-or-treating, ghoulish costumes, and twisted cinema have become an annual tradition. Over time, there have been many outstanding pictures that have made mandatory viewing on All Hallows Eve. From the easiest of family pictures to the most intense of slashers, there's almost no social circle uncatered for. So join me as I count down the top 10 Halloween movies. This is not a list ranking the movies of the Michael Myers franchise, but a list of the very best movies that capture the spirit of the season of Halloween. So let's begin. Number 10. Starring Vincent Price in probably his most memorable role, House on Haunted Hill tells of an eccentric millionaire who invites 5 guests to a haunted house. If managing to stay the duration of the night, will receive $10,000. Directed by William Castle, the movie was an instant hit and exposed many of the special effects used during the golden age of horror, unexpectedly becoming a blueprint for Halloween decorations, inspiring generations to this day. Interestingly, the success of the movie would inspire Alfred Hitchcock to make his first fully fledged horror picture, Psycho. And despite a lackluster remake in 1999, House on Haunted Hill is recognized as one of the finest movies of the 1950s and the magnum opus of Vincent Price. Number 9. Stepping outside my usual selections of alternate cinema, there's no denying that Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial is a beloved Halloween classic. Recognized as one of the greatest of all family pictures, the story of a stranded alien who befriends the children of an unassuming suburban family would become the highest-grossing movie of its time. Set over the Halloween period, the story would use the season as a device to keep the alien secret. Interestingly, in a scene where E.T. recognizes Yoda and also having the ability to levitate, has led many fans to believe that E.T. is in fact a Jedi. Featuring an outstanding young cast and groundbreaking animatronics by FX master Dennis Muren, E.T. is recognized as a timeless tale and one of the greatest sci-fi pictures ever made. Number 8. One of the greatest hidden gem movies of the 1980s, Night of the Demons follows a group of sexually charged teens who throw a Halloween party at an abandoned funeral parlor. Following a seance that awakens a demon within the crematorium, the host Angela becomes possessed, and one by one begins to turn the party. Often criticized for lack of originality and becoming compared to a slew of other demonic possession movies of the time, the movie was still able to find an audience, and although lacking with its storyline, with enough sleaze, gore, and practical effects to please any lover of 80s trash horror, Night of the Demons is an unsung schlock classic. Number 7. Capping off the end of the 90s teen horror movement came the black stoner comedy Idle Hands, the tale of a hedonistic teen whose hand takes on a murderer's life of its own. Taken from the biblical proverb, idle hands are the devil's workshop, the movie fully satirizes the concept to create a truly unique picture. Filmed in the same location as John Carpenter's Halloween, and a notable cameo from punk rock band The Offspring, the movie was sadly overlooked upon release, but would ultimately become a sleeper hit. Only growing in popularity and earning a small cult status, Idle Hands was the last great horror comedy of the 1990s. Number 6. Adapted from the Washington Irving novel, and possibly the best-known interpretation of the tale of the Headless Horseman, comes Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. The story of Ichabod Crane as he sets out to debunk the existence of a folklore monster, which some believe to be a modern take on the classic Hammer Studios pictures, although Burton himself has admitted to being inspired by the movies of Giallo master Mario Bava. One of the most prominent features of the film being the incredible set designs and an always welcome cameo from Christopher Walken. Earning a small cult following, Sleepy Hollow has become a respected picture and remains a thoroughly entertaining Halloween feature. Number 5. Arguably one of the greatest child-friendly horror movies of all time, The Monster Squad was also one of cinema's greatest crossovers. Following a team of youths who share a love of monster movies, find themselves pitted against some of the most iconic: the Gill Man, the Mummy, the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster, and Dracula. Despite featuring a predominant child cast, the movie was aimed at a more mature audience, including some impressively intense scenes perfectly blended with several laugh-out-loud moments. Only growing more popular in time, The Monster Squad serves as a perfect gateway movie and an outstanding tribute to Universal horror. Number 4. Although more closely related to A Christmas Picture and the second entry from Tim Burton, The Nightmare Before Christmas has become compulsory Halloween viewing. The musical tale of Jack Skellington, the King of Halloween, and his journey of the discovery of Christmas. Featuring songs by composer Danny Elfman, the show-stealing number This Is Halloween would become a seasonal standard, including official cover versions by Panic at the Disco and even Marilyn Manson. Combining the two opposing seasons so respectively, The Nightmare Before Christmas is recognized as one of Burton's greatest movies and some of the very best claymation ever set to screen. Number 3. Without question the most iconic of all Halloween-themed movies, John Carpenter's tale of an escaped mental patient on a murder spree has become a hallowed horror feature. Released in 1978, Halloween was an instant hit and peaked the Silver Age of horror. Following the trend originally set by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of basing the story in potential reality, coupled with Carpenter's exceptional understanding of horror direction, the movie shocked the world and became an instant classic. Only growing more popular over time and still receiving direct sequels over 40 years later, Halloween has become one of the most respected and longest-running franchises in cinema history. Number 2. Anthology movies have become a staple in the world of alternate cinema. One of the finest examples being 2007's Trick or Treat. Steeped in seasonal decor and comprising of 5 in-running segments showcasing an array of different horror genres all set on Halloween night. Featuring serial killers, ghouls, werewolves, and introducing the now iconic Halloween Sam, the variety within the narratives made for one of the most accessible twisted movies that only seems to gain in popularity every year. Perfectly capturing the darker side of the season, blended with black humor and a sprinkling of nudity, Trick or Treat is a perfect accompanying movie for any horror lover on Halloween. If you enjoy Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have your say in future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. Number 1. There are few movies able to entertain multiple generations. Released in 1993, Hocus Pocus was a movie to do just that. Upon original release, the picture was considered a failure, losing Disney a reported $16 million. It wasn't until syndication and home video release that the movie found its audience, and has since become Disney's most profitable Halloween feature. Featuring standout performances as the Sanderson sisters, the story tells of 3 witches who are resurrected from the dead and only have the night of Halloween to feed on enough children's souls to grant them eternal life. Packed with light black comedy, standout musical numbers, and an always welcome cameo from Doug Jones, Hocus Pocus remains a most universally entertaining movie that's still celebrated to this day, because Halloween is not just a season for lovers of alternate cinema, it's a season for all. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which Halloween movies do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. At its core, there's only two types of horror, traditional and parody. What traditional focuses more on fear, parody tends to focus more on comedy. Making light of any serious situation has become a common defense mechanism. In times of pain and sadness, laughter is often referred to as the best medicine. Within the plethora of subgenres of alternate cinema, humor has become a favorite addition, taking the dark and macabre and turning it upside down to create highly contrasting yet perfectly blended pictures. In this episode of Demented Top Tens, we'll be exploring the most standout features with themes of fear and funny. So join me as I count down the top 10 horror comedies. For this list, I'll be looking at the very best movies that combine both horror and comedy. Joining me this week, may I introduce The Newbie.
Hello there, I'm Tom from The Newbie, where I review movies of all kinds with my own personal spin. But I also love horror movies. And when they can make a funny horror movie, that's the Reese's Cup perfect mix of chocolate and peanut butter. I mean, scares and laughs. It's not easy to throw a laugh or two without betraying the horror tone. So these movies get it right. So let's begin.
Number 10. Possibly the most eccentric cult movie of the 1980s, Killer Clowns from Outer Space is an unquestionable schlock classic. Best known for their work in special effects, created by the one-time filmmakers the Chiodo brothers, the movie is the basic tale of an alien invasion, flipped upside down with a demented circus theme. Making impressive use of a relatively low budget, the standout practical effects alone made the movie stand out among its peers and created pop culture icons of two of the main antagonists, Jojo the Clownzilla and Shorty. With a sequel in the works from Sci-Fi, Killer Clowns from Outer Space is one of the most imaginative and creative pictures truly deserving of its cult status.
Clowns, man. Pennywise, the Joker, Sideshow Bob. Why wouldn't aliens show up as clowns? The filmmakers capitalized on people's common fear of clowns. It plays like every other Space Invader movie, it hits all the same beats, but with clowns. How serious can a clown be? Okay, I stand corrected. But since this is a comedy, the filmmakers lean into the silly circus tone. It's violent, it's cheesy, and just way over the top. Or should I say, the big top.
Number 9. There are few movies able to appeal to multiple generations. Released in 1990, Tremors is one of the prime examples. Originally inspired by Jaws and homage to the creature features of the 1950s, the discovery of a species of a giant sandworm with a taste for human flesh would become an unexpected cult hit. Starring Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward as two simple yet charming yokels, the movie featured great character dynamics and some surprisingly terrifying scenes. Originally opening to poor returns, upon syndication became one of the most rented movies of 1990. Surprisingly intelligent and one of the all-time great matinee horror movies, Tremors is also a perfect gateway picture for newcomers to the genre.
Like Jaws, you don't get a good look at the creatures until far into the movie, and it doesn't disappoint. There's something about the notion of the ground opening up under you that's the stuff of nightmares. As a comedy, it's not trying to be funny, the characters have plenty of genuine chemistry, and their interplay is what drives the humor. Nobody's an archetype, there's no character designed for the audience to hate, and there's no traitorous bastards. I liked everyone, and that made the deaths even more gruesome and painful to watch. It gave us a lot to root for. Roots are underground, get it?
Number 8. Following The Howling and Twilight Zone the movie, Joe Dante would create the most iconic horned monsters in cinema, gremlins. Receiving an exotic pet as a Christmas gift, Billy unwittingly breeds a race of crazed demonic creatures that terrorize his hometown. Interestingly, the movie would spark controversy for several of its more intense moments. Originally being released as a PG movie, within 2 months, the MPAA would create the PG-13 rating as a response, forever changing what was considered child-friendly pictures. Still praised to this day for its outstanding creature effects by Rick Baker, Gremlins is also one of the greatest alternate Christmas movies of all time.
Muppets and murder. Gizmo is my main man. For beings created hours previously, they're awfully tuned in to current pop culture. It turns into a twisted children's show halfway into the movie, and it gets even crazier in the sequel. I usually prefer puppetry to CG, and the puppetry was top-notch. The creatures felt real and tangible. Gizmo is adorable and unfortunately has more on-screen charisma than our lead. But this is Gizmo's movie. But don't forget Phoebe Cates' unforgettable monologue that makes this a Christmas classic. And hey, it's Phoebe Cates. Plus, you won't look at microwaves the same way ever again.
Number 7. Being the most recent picture on this list is a testament to the quality of 2009's Zombieland. Starring Woody Harrelson and Jesse Eisenberg as two survivors following a zombie apocalypse. Meeting two sisters as they travel America to find safe haven, the centerpiece of the movie is their unlikely relationships as they're forced to band together. The first cinematic outing for director Ruben Fleischer, the movie was originally intended as a TV series, an idea which is still being discussed to this day. Also featuring a show-stealing cameo from the legendary Bill Murray, which was originally offered to Patrick Swayze prior to his passing, Zombieland became one of the highest-grossing and most beloved movies of the 21st century.
Bill Murray's cameo reminds us why he's a comedic treasure. Such a lighthearted take on the undead genre, where specific glee is taken in the slaughter of zombies. Forget that these were once people. Columbus's rules are actually fairly good advice in this situation, so print them out just in case. I feel like we're closer to it than ever. The real fun is watching these characters meld into an offbeat family that actually takes the tone of this post-apocalyptic story into a hopeful one. And it's not so bleak. It's got a surprising amount of heart, and the scene where Woody Harrelson reveals the truth about his dog, the father in me tears up every time.
Number 6. From the master of dark fantasy Tim Burton comes the picture that would fully realize his unique style, Beetlejuice. The story of a recently deceased couple as they try to rid their home of the new occupants. Enlisting the help of a cathartic bio-exorcist, the movie develops into a craze fest of cartoonish insanity. Making a household name of Michael Keaton, the movie would win multiple awards for its makeup and practical effects, and also the Saturn Award for Best Horror Film. Released in 1988 and adapted to a stage musical in 2016, Beetlejuice has since become one of the most beloved movies of its decade in any given genre.
Before Batman, Tim Burton and Michael Keaton gave us Beetlejuice. An exorcism from the ghost point of view was something new, and the thought of the afterlife involving so much red tape is truly terrifying. For the title character, Beetlejuice isn't in the movie as much, but he steals the show every damn time. The score by Danny Elfman added to a darkly silly tone, and it's a soundtrack I can listen to over and over. It even had one of my favorite character actors, Jeffrey Jones. I mean, I really liked him. What's he been up to lately? And I want to know what the other side of this looks like. But this is just one of my favorite movies of all time. You thought I was going to say Beetlejuice again, didn't you? Uh-oh.
Number 5. Where Evil Dead was mostly horror, part comedy, and Army of Darkness being mostly comedy and part horror, Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn is the perfect blend of both. Wasting no time in following a short recap of the first movie, this second outing sees Ash as he has to survive a second night in the cabin. Making full use of its larger budget, the movie showcases some of the most impressive effects of its time, all brought together with the hammy eccentricity of the now legendary Bruce Campbell. Generally accepted as the fan favorite of the franchise, Evil Dead 2 has since become one of the most respected and heralded movies in the history of horror.
Made for the price of a used car, Evil Dead 2 remains one of the most iconic horror movies in history. It's bloody, it's gory, and it's also insanely funny. If you get a chance, read If Chins Could Kill by Ash himself, Bruce Campbell. You get a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff about this movie and some other movies. It's a hell of a read. Anyway, back to the movie. The tone shifts make this one hell of a roller coaster. Even when some of the humor is somewhat sophomoric, it's still so absurd you can't help but laugh uncomfortably. You welcome those laughs because the rest of the movie will give you nightmares. A man chainsaws off his own hand. A woman eats a zombie's eyeball. Something the joyless remake just didn't have enough of. In fact, more movies in general could use more zombie eyeball eating.
Number 4. Of the many parody movies they created, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is recognized by many as their greatest. Released in 1948 alongside Abbott and Costello Meet Boris Karloff, the movie sees Chick and Talbot as they acquire the remains of Dracula, and Frankenstein's monster. Interestingly, this would be the only time Bela Lugosi would reprise his performance of Dracula, and also being a Universal production, making the movie an official sequel to Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. In 2001, the movie was added to the National Film Registry and is recognized by the American Film Institute as the 56th funniest American movie of all time, and the only true homage to the original Universal monster movies.
Before the Monster Squad, before the MCU, Hollywood already liked mashing their franchises together. From the title, I wasn't expecting this movie to also include classic horror icons Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Lon Chaney as the Wolfman, Glenn Strange as Frankenstein's monster. Vincent Price was the Invisible Man. I didn't see him. You had Abbott and Costello's screwball comedy spliced in with actual horror scenes that could be plucked from any horror movie of the time. And the movie managed to shift tone back and forth without breaking the experience. That's a tough balance to maintain. Imagine Ace Ventura kidnapped by Jigsaw. It's either going to be Ace Ventura's movie or it's Jigsaw's movie. Excuse me, I have a screenplay to write.
Number 3. Although opening to very little acclaim, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil has since become one of the greatest sleeper hits of the 21st century. Featuring two simple but charming hillbilly friends, when they are assumed as killers by a group of idiotic teens. Following a series of misunderstandings and fatal accidents, the movie turns upside down as both parties fight to stay alive. The movie became a word-of-mouth hit that evolved into a minor cult status, which recently rumored a sequel that would see the boys in a Texas Chainsaw-style situation. Charming, gory, and laugh-out-loud hilarious, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil is one of the greatest hidden gem movies of the 2010s.
I went in expecting a completely different movie. I thought it was going to be an Evil Dead, cabin in the woods wannabe. Yeah, two rednecks in the woods, battling evil. Seen it. Instead, we get a lesson in judging books by their cover. How people can surprise you. It starts off with innocent misunderstandings and just really escalates from there. I think the best aspect of this movie is the sheer likability and naive nature of the title characters. The audience is fully aware of what's happening, so we're not scared, but everyone on screen is scared shitless of each other. And we know everything is not as bad as it looks to them, at least at first, and that's why it works so well.
Number 2. The first installment of Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy, and making household names of Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, Shaun of the Dead is considered by many to be their finest work. Released in 2006, the movie appeared to be nothing more than a love letter to classic zombie pictures, but unlike other parody movies that use mockery to insult horror, Shaun of the Dead praises its own cliches and delivers its own story arc. Peppered with countless homages to its many inspirations and packed with cynical British charm, Shaun of the Dead would go on to become the highest-grossing comedies of the 2000s and is now regarded as one of the greatest British horror movies of all time.
Edgar Wright is one of my favorite directors. Nobody makes the most mundane activities look so exciting. I love the way this movie is shot and edited. It's a time for a loser to become a hero. It gives the rest of us hope. This movie has so much heart, so much energy. It's also gory enough to satisfy gorehounds, like any zombie movie worth its weight. It's just plain funny and brilliant. Most zombie movies treat the characters as disposable fodder, but the losses here really get you. You feel the loss. There are touching moments you don't expect in a zombie flick. It gets very emotional, and we can get behind the characters. By the way, you have red on you.
If you enjoyed Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have your say in future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon, links in the description box below. Number 1. In the history of cinema, there's been few movies able to appeal to multiple generations. Released in 1984, Ghostbusters is arguably the finest example. The story of three parapsychologists who begin their own apparition extermination business. Written by and starring several members of Saturday Night Live, the movie was inspired by Dan Aykroyd's personal intrigue into the supernatural, blended perfectly with Harold Ramis's comedic character writing. Directed by Ivan Reitman, the movie would become a pop culture phenomenon and ultimately be inducted to the Library of Congress. Also featuring some truly unsettling moments, Ghostbusters has stood the test of time and is not also the greatest horror comedy, but also one of the greatest movies of all time.
This was, and still is, a perfect blend of comedy and light horror. Given the Saturday Night Live SCTV alumni, I went in expecting a silly comedy. It's iconic, side-splittingly funny. I quoted the movie all through high school. I wasn't a fan of the sequel. The reboot was okay. I loved the real Ghostbusters until Slimer became the focus, but Ghostbusters the video game is still the best part 3 so far. I loved that it wasn't slapstick. It was a smart, witty film that could still pull off light horror beats. But most importantly, it had charm. It had character and depth. Ray was the heart, Egon was the brain, Winston was the muscle, and Venkman was the mouth. They complemented each other and completed a team. I was a nerdy kid in school, and this movie let me realize that there was nothing wrong with that. Brains could still save the world, and wit could deflect any stressful situation. It had a huge impact on my impressionable youth. But the big question I've had ever since: why was Venkman carrying Thorazine on a date?
So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which horror comedies do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and a huge thank you to the newbie for appearing in this episode.
I think the only movie I would add is Young Frankenstein. Mel Brooks at his prime. One of the funniest, most quotable movies ever. It felt like a classic movie from the 40s. It didn't really mock the tropes of a typical parody. Instead, Brooks twisted the tropes with a unique set of characters that gives us a different, often hilarious interpretation. Not a parody, but rather an earnest addition to the Frankenstein lore. That's it for me. Big thanks to Demented Pictures for inviting me to come and play. We really should do this again. Come visit my channel, the link's below. This is the newbie, and I'll see you later, kids. Toodles!
Be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Cinematic adaptations of true events have become commonplace in cinema, from war movies to lighthearted comedies. Tales of survival to historical diaries, there's something more humbling and personal to stories of which we can identify. Over the years, there's been many outstanding pictures to retell actual events, often taking liberties for dramatic effect. One of the most notable genres to take advantage is horror. The use of genuine accounts has become one of the most effective tools in alternate cinema, whether it be a basic slasher or a complex psychological dark thriller, because the truth is that nothing is as scary as reality. So join me as I count down the top 10 movies based on real events. For this list, I'll be looking at the most impressive dark pictures that were inspired by real events. Authenticity will not be a factor, but judged on the movies they spawned. I'll also be overlooking the movies that depict the horror of war, as that's a list for another time. So let's begin. Number 10. During the late 1980s and early 90s, Australian serial killer Ivan Milat made international news as the Backpack Murderer. Released in 2005, Wolf Creek is the dramatization of the actual event. Also taking notes from the killer Bradley Murdoch, who's currently serving a life sentence for similar murders. The movie follows three stranded hikers who run into Mick Taylor, a twisted outback yokel who is the amalgamation of Milat and Murdoch. Noted in cinema history as one of the pictures to create the torture porn subgenre, the abhorrent events depicted would earn the movie mass notoriety. Atypical to Australian productions, the movie would further the reported brutality and deliver one of the most viscerally disturbing pictures of the 21st century. Number 9. The case of Sylvia Likens has become infamous in American history. A girl who was imprisoned, tortured, abused, and ultimately murdered by her own guardian would make national headlines in 1965. Taking liberties to adapt the account to screen, The Girl Next Door follows the perspective of a friend who bared witness and was forced to participate in the harrowing tribulations of Meg, the cinematic representation of Likens. Adapted to screen by Jack Ketchum, the original case would contribute to the creation of the American Child Protection Agency, and despite the events also being covered in An American Crime, The Girl Next Door is one of the most hard-hitting and heartbreaking movies of the reality genre. Number 8. The concept of a malevolent sentient home had often been seen in Hollywood. Released in 1979, the retelling of an actual account would create one of the most iconic movies of the decade, the Amityville Horror. The most unnerving fact of the homicide was the lack of reaction from other family members following gunfire, assuming many to believe that it was the house that allowed them to be executed. The movie follows the Lutz family, named after the inhabitants following the incident, who reported supernatural happenings within the building. Although heavily dramatized for the picture, the Amityville Horror is still recognized as one of the most terrifying experiences in cinema. Number 7. As one of the more difficult to believe reality-based horror movies, the premise for The Hills Have Eyes was taken from a 16th century cannibalistic clan headed by the infamous Sawney Bean. Active on the shores of Scotland, Bean was reported to have fathered an inbred family of 45 children and grandchildren, many of which were born of kidnapped women, homing his family within the cliffside of the caves of Ben Ain Head. The Beans were speculated to have consumed several hundred victims prior to their capture. Directed by master of horror Wes Craven and adapted to a modern setting by using radioactive fallout to make the family appear more grotesque, the reality behind The Hills Have Eyes remains one of the most disturbing chapters in British history. Number 6. Tales of alien abduction are no stranger in American folklore. In the case of Travis Walton, it would prove to be one of the most unsettling accounts in American history. Penned by the actual reported abductee, Fire in the Sky retells the account of a lumberjack who disappeared for 5 days in 1975. Witnessed by 5 of his co-workers, the movie explores the mystery surrounding Walton's disappearance, which ultimately leads to the legendary abduction sequence. Starring Daniel Sweeney and Robert Patrick, the extraordinary backwoods story has since become mandatory viewing for both sci-fi and horror fans. And although the report's account has been picked apart by skeptics, as a movie, Fire in the Sky is one of the most unnerving pictures of the 1990s. Number 5. Professing to over 100 murders, including that of his own mother, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, is the dramatization of nomadic murderer Henry Lee Lucas. Written and directed by John McNaughton, who was taken by Lucas's lack of remorse or emotion, would base the story on Henry teaching his former cellmate to be a protege killer. Based on Otis Toole, another genuine nomadic serial killer, the movie took very few liberties with the reported source material and was subsequently banned in several countries. Over time, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, managed to find an audience and is now recognized as one of the greatest dark thrillers in all of alternate cinema. Number 4. Despite the fantasy element of Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, the inspiration was taken from several real-world mysteries, most notably 2 fatal conditions, sudden unexplained death syndrome and Brugada syndrome, both resulting in death during sleep. Fascinated with the concept, Craven was inspired to create a physical representation of the illness, basing the character on a disturbing stranger he witnessed in his childhood and named after his junior school bully. Freddy Krueger was created. Adapting the story to suit the horror style of the era, A Nightmare on Elm Street spawned one of the most recognized and original franchises in all of cinema, and also created one of the greatest pop culture icons, not only in horror, but also of the 1980s. Number 3. In August of 1990, there was a media frenzy surrounding Danny Rawling, aka the Gainesville Ripper, a serial killer who murdered 5 students over 4 days with his ultimate goal to become a superstar of murder. The case was closely followed by screenwriter Kevin Williamson, who in response wrote a script entitled Scary Movie. Peppering the story with references to the movies that inspired him as a writer, Scream would be the final product. Released in the Christmas of 1996 and directed by fellow reality enthusiast Wes Craven, the movie first opened to mediocre reception, which over time became one of the biggest movies of the following year, to which many now believe Scream to be the ultimate slasher. Number 2. Often considered to be an adaptation of The Possession of Anneliese Michel, the true genesis of The Exorcist is taken from the case of Robbie Mannheim, a boy of 12 who made headlines in 1949 for being reportedly taken over by a demon. Hearing of the event as a student, writer William Peter Blatty created a story of Reagan, a possessed 12-year-old girl, and fathers Baron and Karras, 2 priests who take holy battle with the demon within. In the years since, there's been much acrimony over the authenticity of the account, to which some see as nothing more than exaggerated hearsay, but there's no denying that The Exorcist is one of the most culturally important movies in the history of horror. If you enjoy Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have your say in future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. Number 1. A name well known in the alternate community, Ed Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, is considered the genesis of modern horror. Shocking the world in 1957, when it was discovered that the unassuming man had not only murdered, but also accessorized dozens of cadavers into furniture and clothing. His actions would lead to 3 of the most prominent horror features of the 20th century. Taking Gein's obsession with his mother and keeping her corpse at home led to the creation of Norman Bates from Robert Bloch's Psycho. his craft for accessorizing human body parts would furnish the Sawyer household in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And also, the discovery of a female bodysuit stitched together from the flesh of his victims and other cadavers would be directly referenced in the Academy Award-winning Silence of the Lambs. Arguably the most influential individual in modern horror, Ed Gein's crimes and psychosis would become the building block for the future of alternate cinema. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which movies based on true events do you love the most? Leave a comment below and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Reinventing antagonists is a common trend in cinema. Whether it be zombies, werewolves, or maybe vampires, adapting these classic monsters has only made them more versatile. One of the most recent additions is the relatively new subgenre of killer clowns. First referenced in the early work of Edgar Allan Poe, for almost 200 years there's been an underlying cultural fear surrounding the circus clown. Taken from the recognized fear coulrophobia, the concept of a murderous circus performer has become cemented in modern culture and resulted in many high-profile pictures, which today we'll be looking at the very best. So join me as I count down the top 10 killer clowns. For this list, I'll be exploring and ranking the greatest killer clowns in cinema. This is not a list based on kill count, but purely on the execution of the characters. So let's begin. Number 10. Starting this list comes the hidden gem feature, Stitches. Similar in plot to James O'Barr's The Crow, the story tells of an incompetent clown for hire who is accidentally murdered by a party of children. Resurrected 6 years later to seek revenge on those responsible for his death, he takes down victims with twisted clown-themed kills. Performed by surrealist British comedian Ross Noble, the movie never shies away from any of the gore and features many ridiculous yet creative deaths. Although only managing to find a small fan base, Stitches remains a criminally overlooked horror feature and is also one of the zaniest and gruesome black comedies of the genre. Number 9. Beginning life as a fake viral trailer, after catching the attention of acclaimed horror director Eli Roth, Clown was developed into a full feature. The movie follows the transformation of Kent, a family man who becomes trapped inside a costume that slowly molds his mind and body to that of a child-eating monster. Taking the role of producer, Roth allowed original director John Watts to take lead in the project. Inspired by David Cronenberg's The Fly to create a sympathetic monster until the beast within takes over, he would also include the darkest of humor. Never shying away from graphic scenes and showcasing some impressive practical effects, Clown became a sleeper hit and has since developed its very own cult following. Number 8. Despite pandering to a younger audience, the 1997 movie Spawn would feature the first cinematic outing of one of the comic book's greatest villains. Known simply as Clown, a hellborn demon and creator of the Hellspawn army. Created by Todd McFarlane and performed to key perfection by John Leguizamo, included the eccentricity and intimidation. Clown is merely a chosen form of the Violator, a towering demonic monster with the ability to tear Hellspawn in pieces. Although somewhat neutered in the movie to allow ticket sales to a greater demographic, the presentation of Clown and the performance given by Leguizamo elevated Spawn into one of the most appreciated guilty pleasure movies of the 1990s. Number 7. Released in 2015 comes the under-the-radar picture The Funhouse Massacre, which tells the story of 6 escaped psychopaths who rampage a haunted house attraction, their youngest member being Dollface. The daughter of a murderous cult leader with a delightfully twisted approach to killing, Dollface is a sadly obscure character, but possibly deserving of her own feature. Using dark seductive charm to lure her victims, her agility and resourcefulness make for an efficiently lethal killer. And despite being an overall mediocre movie, The dark humor, gratuitous gore, and of course Dollface make the Funhouse Massacre a worthwhile picture. Number 6. Possibly the genesis of the killer clown niche in media, genuine serial killer John Wayne Gacy would pose as Patches the Clown to lure his unsuspecting victims. Retold in several features, the best being the made-for-TV movie To Catch a Killer. Performed by Brian Dennehy as Gacy, with the exception of the active years, the feature would be the most accurate retelling of the actual account. Also stalking under the guise of Pogo the Clown, and responsible for a minimum of 33 murders, the bodies of which were discovered within his own home, Gacy would become recognized as one of the most prolific and predatory serial killers in American history. Number 5. Possibly the most brutal killer on the list, Art the Clown from 2016's Terrifier is also one of the most demanded antagonists in alternate cinema. Beginning life as a 20-minute short that was revisited in the anthology movie All Hallows Eve would eventually be fully fleshed out into its own feature. What makes the clown so intimidating is the lack of any explanation or motive for his killing. Showcasing several gratuitously violent kills, the movie is considered by many to fall into the category of extreme cinema. Only growing more popular over time, and slowly building into a cult following, Art the Clown has all the makings to become one of the big horror icons of the 21st century. Number 4. Of the plethora to choose from within killer clowns from outer space, using the rule of only one per franchise, the title goes to Shorty, the diminutive member of the titular killer clowns. Unlike the other members who capture victims in order to feed, Shorty's agenda is much more deadly. Often seen riding a tricycle and armed with acidic cream pies and a deadly ray gun, he also possesses super strength, resulting in one of the movie's most memorable moments and earning the largest kill count in the picture. Oddly adorable and ruthlessly deadly, Shorty is arguably the most iconic of all the Killer Clown clan and has become a recent hit attraction at the Universal Halloween Horror Nights, cementing his place in pop culture history. Number 3. First appearing in Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses, Captain Spaulding made an immediate impact on the alternate community. Starting as an eccentric roadside attraction host, and named after the Marx Brothers character Captain Jeffrey T. Spaulding, the movie presents the clown as a lesser evil, but also intimidating and lethal. Despite being portrayed as a villainous character, returning for the sequel The Devil's Rejects would make Spaulding a somewhat anti-hero. Played by the late great Sid Haig, he returned to the character one final time in 2019's Three from Hell, which would sadly be his final screen performance, but left behind an outstanding legacy in horror and is one of the all-time greatest killer clowns in cinema. Number 2. Created by the master of horror Stephen King and becoming one of the most recognizable faces in alternate cinema, Pennywise has also become one of the highest profile antagonists in media. Originally performed by the legendary Tim Curry in the made-for-TV movie, and later respectfully portrayed by Bill Skarsgård in the 2017 revision, it is an otherworldly being with a taste for children and the ability to shapeshift, its favorite form being that of a clown, chosen as the most appealing effigy to lure its prey, his drive being that fear makes his prey irresistibly tasty. Whether your love is with Tim Curry or the Muschietti adaptation, there's no denying that Pennywise is one of the biggest pop culture icons in modern horror. If you enjoy Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have your say in future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. Number 1. Forget defining what constitutes to being a clown. There's no denying the Clown Prince of Gotham, the Joker, is the supreme killer clown. Created in 1940 by famed comic book creator Bob Kane to be the ideal nemesis of the Caped Crusader, the enigmatic villain that lives for pure chaos has deservedly become one of the most iconic villains in media history. Serving as the face of pure anarchy, with a history shrouded in ambiguity and an equally mysterious and deadly agenda, the Joker's unpredictable nature has made him a most intriguing and oddly supportable character. Even with his multiple reimaginings since his original creation, whether it be Cesar Romero, Jack Nicholson, Mark Hamill, Heath Ledger, Joaquin Phoenix, or even Jared Leto, the Joker is one of the most respected villains in all of media and is truly deserving of being crowned the king of killer clowns. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which killer clowns do you love the most? Leave a comment below and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Following the feedback of the original found footage video, of the many suggestions left by you, it seemed only fitting to return to the niche one more time. A subgenre almost exclusive to horror, the pictures that present themselves as captured reality have become some of the most beloved in alternate cinema and also one of its most prolific. To address the lack of Cannibal Holocaust, which many claim to be a found footage movie, this is not true. Cannibal Holocaust only contains a found footage segment and is not a true found footage feature. For the record, had it been included in the original top 10, it would have ranked at number 3. But now it's time to once more explore this most heralded subgenre. So join me as I count down another top 10 found footage movies. For this list, I'll be looking at the very best found footage movies not to be covered in the original video. If there's a movie not covered in this episode that you expected to see, follow the link at the end of the video for the original top 10. So let's begin. Number 10. The fear of the contents of the deep web has always been a common source of aspiration for horror stories. Released in 2013, The Den is one of the greatest examples. While working on a social experiment, a sociology student witnesses a live murder on a roulette-style chat room. Unable to track the stream and considered an internet prank by the police, she finds herself victim of being cyberstalked, which progresses into increasingly more threatening physical conflicts. Directed by Zachary Donahue and starring Melanie Papalia, the movie was mostly overlooked by the masses. However, The Den serves as an intense dark warning against privacy exposure in a digital world. Number 9. A horror movie in disguise as a crime documentary. Comprising of interviews and evidential archive footage, Savageland is one of the most authentic pictures in this list. Investigating the disappearance of 60 people from a small town, interviewing a lone survivor thought to be a mass murderer, he presents a series of photographs that show a much more disturbing explanation. Though not a traditional horror movie, showing very little graphic horror, the movie is built almost completely on tone, creating an oddly immersive experience. Still remaining a relatively obscure picture, Savageland is remarkably authentic and worthy of far greater recognition. Number 8. Created as a passion project by acclaimed director M. Night Shyamalan, The Visit is possibly the most commercial picture on this list, but also the most comedic. Following a brother and sister who travel cross-country to meet their estranged grandparents, the movie is filmed as a diary by the wannabe filmmaker's sister, documenting their trip and the increasingly odd behavior of their relatives, resulting in a surprisingly effective dark twist. What makes the movie stand out amongst its peers is the aforementioned comedy, making for an easily digestible picture, and although lacking any intense horror, The Visit still manages to unsettle and is recognized as one of the best M. Night Shyamalan movies. Number 7. Released in 2013 and also known as Final Prayer, The Borderlands might be the finest example of British found footage. Following 3 paranormal investigators sent to a remote English church to review video footage of supposed supernatural activity, initially suspecting the priest of fabricating the hype to generate publicity, they discover an unsettling reality that something much more insidious is responsible. Directed by Elliot Goldner, the movie skillfully feeds the viewer just enough clues that builds up to an incredibly tense final act, making for an unmissable and unforgettable ending. The Borderlands is a remarkably proficient movie for a first-time filmmaker, sadly falling into the bracket of obscurity and truly deserving of greater recognition. Number 6. Possibly starting the boom of the 2010s found footage movement, The Tunnel is also one of the most overlooked. Following a journalistic team investigating a potential government cover-up of a water scandal, they find themselves in the underground tunnels of Sydney. Hoping to uncover the truth, they instead discover a sinister creature living in the underground. Although similar in tone to As Above, So Below and Grave Encounters, the movie achieves a more suspenseful and believable atmosphere, proficiently using the what you don't see is scarier method, and although sadly reliant on jump scares, The Tunnel's foreboding and claustrophobic atmosphere make for one of the most tense movies in all of horror. Number 5. Tales of vampires have always garnered great attention from horror lovers. One of the best and most overlooked examples is 2013's Afflicted. Following 2 friends on a bucket list adventure of Europe, beginning as a simple holiday vlog, one of the men is attacked in Barcelona. Afflicted with a deathly sickness, upon his recovery, discovers he's gained an otherworldly new strength. Similar in plot to acclaimed found footage movie Chronicle, the movie documents the self-discovery of his new powers until a thirst for blood begins to take hold. Showcasing many impressive action scenes and not shying away from any of the horror, Afflicted is a surprisingly heart-filled picture. Number 4. Possibly the most disturbingly believable film of them all, Be My Cat, A Film for Anne, tells the story of an obsessed hyperfan who goes to the extremes to earn the attention of actress Anne Hathaway. Set in Romania, the movie serves as a directorial pitch to convince the actress of his proficiency in filmmaking. Hiring actresses for the demo reel, we discover his enthusiasm for Hathaway is way beyond fandom, resulting in increasingly abhorrent acts upon the actresses. Winning several awards and earning great acclaim in 2015, the movie was self-funded with an equivalent budget of $10,000 and almost completely produced by lead star Adrian Tefay. Although remaining unfairly obscure, Be My Cat serves as an outstanding and inspiring example of truly independent filmmaking. Number 3. There's a common misconception that horror comprises of only psychopaths or the supernatural. Released in 2012, The Conspiracy presents a rarely seen experience in fear. Following 2 documentary filmmakers who interview an eccentric conspiracy theorist, after mysteriously disappearing, they piece together his research to discover an unsettling plausibility that their population is being manipulated by a higher governmental power and find themselves target to a secret society. Although a work of fiction, because of the potential reality and its parody of real-world theories, The Conspiracy is one of the most underappreciated movies and one of the most believable in the found footage genre. Number 2. Returning once again to Australia comes the massively underrated and unsettlingly authentic tale of Lake Mungo. Following the mysterious death of their daughter, while seeking closure, the Palmer family become haunted by her image, which indirectly leads them to uncover her cause of death. Created by the one-time director Joel Anderson, the true beauty of the movie is within its excellent use of misdirection, feeding the viewer believable ulterior reasonings and introducing natural tangent storylines, ending with a hauntingly beautiful afterthought. Lake Mungo is a heartbreaking exploration of loss and grief that serves as a saddening reminder to be more loving to your family. If you enjoyed Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon, links in the description box below. Number 1. When venturing even deeper into the world of found footage, I discovered Hell House LLC to be one of the most criminally overlooked and arguably greatest hidden gem features in the subgenre. Following an interview with a survivor of a Halloween tragedy, a personal video account of the event showed the unsettling truth. A team eager of creating the ultimate haunted house attraction find themselves victim to their chosen location. Filmed as a behind-the-scenes documentation, the footage shows the progressive intensity of the group's haunting over several days, ultimately building to the fateful opening night, climaxing into an outstanding payoff of supernatural carnage. Featuring great atmosphere, believable characters, perfect pacing, and outstanding scares, Hell House LLC could also be an outside contender for the title of the greatest found footage movie of them all. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which found footage movies do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Since the beginning of Demented Pictures, I've always avoided referring to myself as a horror channel, but instead as an alternate media channel, and I do this to allow the inclusion of dark thrillers and other media formats. There's a common misconception that a horror movie must contain a supernatural element to be classed as such. If this mentality were to be correct, many of the greatest horror movies would be declassified. Despite the controversy, dark thrillers have become the most respected genre in alternate cinema. Coined by some as sophisticated horror, these pictures have risen the ranks of society and are often nominated for Academy recognition. And now it's time to take a look at the very best. So join me as I count down the top 10 dark thrillers. For this list, I'll be looking at the greatest dark thrillers to feature no supernatural elements and that could exist within reality. I'll also be overlooking slasher movies, as that's a list for another time. So let's begin. Number 10. Now recognized as one of the best directors of the previous generation, comes Danny Boyle's first cinematic outing, Shallow Grave. Considered a spiritual sequel to Trainspotting, following the death of a new roommate, three friends discover a bag full of money beside his corpse. Choosing to dispose of the body and keep the money for themselves, doing the unthinkable, the movie follows the downward spiral as they all undergo severe psychological changes, leading to one of the most unnerving and intense indie movies of the 1990s. Sadly overshadowed by Boyle's later work, Shallow Grave has become somewhat lost in time, but remains to many of Boyle's fans, including his own father, as his greatest work to date. Number 9. Staying within England comes the morally twisted dark revenge feature Dead Man's Shoes. A tale of the older sibling of a retarded man, returning from the army to seek revenge on the men who abused his brother. Starring Paddy Considine as Richard, the unyielding drive that leads him to take down those responsible made for one of the most brutal and terrifying anti-heroes ever set to screen. The true beauty of the movie is how it challenges the viewer into questioning Richard's executions, forcing you to decide whether his actions are righteous or pure savagery. Dead Man's Shoes delivers an almighty final twist to leave any viewer cold, but also answer the question to the killer's morals. Number 8. Tales of Backwoods Horror is no stranger to alternate cinema. One of the greatest examples is 1972's Deliverance. Beginning as a would-be buddy movie, following 4 friends who, while on a kayaking trip in Georgia, fall prey to demented hick-yokels. Managing to escape, their story becomes more of wilderness survival. Presented with a dark cynicism towards simple society, the true horror is to be found within its societal commentary. Also featuring the iconic dueling banjos, and even earning 3 Oscar nominations at the 45th Academy Awards, losing out to Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, Deliverance has since been invested into the Library of Congress as one of the most culturally important movies in American history. Number 7. From acclaimed author Stephen King comes a tale of personal fear, Misery. The story of a renowned author who, upon completing the final book of an acclaimed series, finds himself prisoner to an obsessed hyperfan. Portrayed with twisted perfection by Kathy Bates, Annie Wilkes discovers that within the final novel, her favorite character, Misery Chastain, is to die. Unable to separate fiction from reality, and believing a rewrite would return the character from death, she goes to the extreme to get her character revived. Directed by Rob Reiner, the movie became the second highest-grossing picture of 1990, losing out to the Christmas classic Home Alone, but would go on to win the Oscar for Best Actress, going to Bates' remarkable performance. Number 6. Released to critical acclaim and only growing more popular over time, American Psycho is arguably one of the most sophisticated thrillers of the 21st century. Starring Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman, a successful executive who lives a dual life as a psychopath. Serving as a cynical commentary on the business mogul world, it also features a dark commentary of New York society. A movie that's also open to interpretation, that upon repeat viewings presents easily overlooked yet narrative-altering subtleties that may reveal the truth behind the ambiguity of Bateman's reality. Directed by Mary Harron, the movie originally opened to polarizing reviews, some seeing it as overly sexual and excessively violent, but to others, an outstanding dark comedy that perfectly parodies the eccentricities of the materialistic world. Number 5. Often mentioned in Demented Top Tens, and for good reason, I Saw the Devil is a movie truly deserving of greater recognition. Beginning as a somewhat simple yet extreme revenge movie, the typical narrative is complete within the first act. What makes it stand among its peers is the lack of satisfaction from the main protagonist, who chooses to free his nemesis to extract a more fitting revenge. Despite the relentless brutal nature, the movie is also oddly relatable, featuring a lead character whose motive you can fully support but also abhor. Sadly remaining a somewhat obscure picture in the Western world, I Saw the Devil delivers a most brutal story that builds to one of the most emotional and profound endings in all of Asian cinema. Number 4. It's a rare occasion when disturbing concepts are handled so proficiently that they receive academic recognition. Released in 1995, David Fincher's Seven is one of the finest examples. Following Detective Mills in Somerset as they try to capture John Doe, a serial killer with the motive of extracting divine justice on victims by forcing them into committing one of the 7 deadly sins, albeit with an eccentrically grotesque execution. Starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, the movie is presented as a sophisticated modern film noir, which, considering the content, caught many viewers off guard. Also featuring one of the greatest ever endings, with a final twist to leave any first-time viewer in awe, Seven remains one of the darkest and highest praised movies of the 1990s. Number 3. Often appearing in Demented Top Tens, and for good reason, is the movie that created modern horror, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Recognized as one of the boldest movies ever made, by not only delivering a disturbing yet believable premise, but also by disposing of the would-be protagonist, leaving the movie purely driven by a psychopath. Played with unsettling perfection by Anthony Perkins, the character of Norman Bates became the original real-world slasher icon, ultimately being recognized as the second greatest cinematic villain of all time, losing out to Darth Vader. Often repeated, but never bettered, Psycho has stood the test of time and still inspires many renowned filmmakers to this very day. Number 2. One of the reigning movies of the previous generation, Oldboy is the second installment of future Oscar winner Chan-wook Park's Vengeance trilogy. Alongside Mr. Vengeance and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, the movie tells of an unimpressive man, kidnapped and locked away for 15 years, finds himself set free with 3 days to discover the reason for his capture. Wasting no time, the picture immediately grabs the viewer and manages to surpass all expectations to deliver an incomparable thrill ride. Released in 2004, Oldboy is a beautifully orchestrated tale of vengeance and mystery that hosts one of the darkest and most shocking payoffs ever seen in cinema. If you enjoy Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook or consider supporting the show on Patreon, link to the description box below. Number 1. Topping Demented Top Tens for a third time is the Academy Award-winning Silence of the Lambs. Written by acclaimed author Thomas Harris, the second installment of the Hannibal Lecter saga sees trainee agent Clarice Starling, who partners with Lecter to help capture an even more psychopathic killer. An external sequel to 1988's Manhunter, the story was one of the first to break the convention of investigation, using a psychopath to catch a psychopath, pitching the iconic Hannibal Lecter against Buffalo Bill, a demented maniac who intends to create a full bodysuit out of women's flesh. Featuring Oscar-winning performances from Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster, the movie would also win Best Director and Best Picture at the 64th Academy Awards. Exploring themes rarely seen in cinema, the movie made an immediate impact not only on the generic movie lovers, but also on sophisticated movie lovers. The Silence of the Lambs is now recognized as one of the top 25 movies of all time. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which dark thrillers do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Technology and horror have always had a special relationship, making aliens, robots, and other dimensions all possible within the world of fiction, and we've been blessed with some of the most creative and imaginative movies of all time. Even in the early days of filmmaking, the fantasies of science have had perhaps the most profound effect on storytelling. Exploring the unknown to fabricate unparalleled fascination has allowed unlimited creativity and imagination, and no place has benefited more than horror. For over 100 years, these dark fantastic tales have produced some of the most beloved movies in history, and today we'll be taking a look at the very best. So join me as I count down the top 10 sci-fi horror movies. For this list, I'll be looking at the greatest sci-fi horror movies ever made. I'll be overlooking predominant body horror pictures, as those movies have already been covered in the previous top 10. Joining me this week, may I introduce Mr. Kyle Wright.
Hey everyone, Kyle here from the Kyle Wright 425 YouTube channel, where usually I'm telling scary stories every Monday and hanging out with the animals down here in the man cave every Friday on our podcast episodes. As you can see, we have a visitor right now. Say hello, Piper. But this week we're doing something a little bit different. I'm helping Mike count down the top 10 sci-fi horror films. Sci-fi is such a limitless genre. You can do with it whatever you want, so as long as it's done properly and most of the time grounded in reality to sell what you're seeing is true. Remember, this list will not be including sci-fi body horror, as that's already been done on Mike's channel. With that being said, so let's begin.
Number 10. The vampire is arguably the most prolific of all nightmare creatures. Reimagined many times over, the most original take can be found in 1985's Life Force. After discovering 3 humanoid life forms in space, returning to Earth and being reanimated with a hunger for life force, the internal energy that allows existence. Directed by the legendary Tobe Hooper and starring Steve Railsback and Matilda May, the movie stands as a sexually charged showcase of practical and visual effects. Released in '85, the movie has grown a small cult following, but never risen to the ranks of full cult status. Featuring many acclaimed British actors and a highly cathartic story, Life Force remains one of the best sci-fi horror movies the world has sadly overlooked.
Starting off with number 10 is Life Force. This is a film that I was not familiar with, but I absolutely loved the execution of this film. Think about this. Everything you know about vampires is wrong. I love it when films take a topic that we are so used to and they completely flip it on its head. It makes everything so unpredictable. There's so much about this film that is great. It is a film that is made well over 30 years ago, and the practical effects still hold up. I can't imagine what it was like to see this film at that time, but what I can tell you, it is absolutely worth putting on the list at number 10.
Number 9. Like many sci-fi pictures, the B-movie format was a common presentation, eventually being seen as campy. Released in 2000, Pitch Black would defy the times and reignite the format. A fantasy picture that evokes a common childhood fear of monsters that live in the dark. After crash landing on an alien planet, the survivors find themselves prey to a local predator that cannot exist in daylight. Introducing the world to the now iconic Richard B. Riddick, the movie would kickstart the career of Vin Diesel and introduce a character so impressive it would spawn its own spin-off franchise. Originally opening to little fanfare, Pitch Black became a word-of-mouth phenomena that developed into one of the most successful sci-fi franchises of the 21st century.
Pitch Black. Now that is a movie that I remember from when I was a kid. 9 years old, 2 in the morning, watching it on HBO and getting terrified of these creatures, thinking that one of them was underneath of my bed. This is not the first time that we've had the concept of that the light saves you and that it hurts monsters. This is actually something that's been done a lot, but Pitch Black does it in such an amazing way. It's not that you're stuck in a room and that you only have a flashlight, or even a house for that matter. You have an entire planet that is encompassed in darkness, and this is when these creatures come out to feed. It is such a simple plot. Get from point A to point B and get the hell off of the rock. And it is done with such brilliance that it is absolutely one of my favorite sci-fi horror films.
Number 8. The concept of deep space exploration has been the dream of many a scientific mind. Released in 1997, Event Horizon explores the nightmare of what we might discover. Directed by Paul Anderson, the story is based on the return of a deep space exploration vessel. Thought to have been lost within a black hole, it's discovered that the ship not only traveled space and time, but also through a hellish dimension. Although suffering from aged effects, the concept, cinematography, and practical effects still managed to deliver a darkly atmospheric picture. Unafraid of including many scenes of hyperviolence, the movie was sadly neutered by the MPAA. Ultimately destroyed, the omitted footage was later found in a Transylvanian salt mine. Still fondly remembered, Event Horizon remains one of the most praised hidden gem sci-fi features of the 1990s.
Event Horizon. This is a film that scared the hell out of me. As an adult, there's so much imagery that's in it. If you really want to see how scary this film is, check out the slowed down versions of all the hell sequences. Man, that is enough to keep you up at night, and it is absolutely worth being on this list as sci-fi horror. It is amazing to me that this film didn't do well when it first came out. Sure, it's lived on after in a cult following, but it's just didn't go appreciated the way that I feel that it should, especially when you find out about the development hell that went on behind the scenes. It's unfortunate it couldn't live to its fullest potential, but it is definitely worthy of being a sci-fi horror film and on this list.
Number 7. To overlook the B-movies of the 1950s would be an injustice to this list. One of the greatest examples being William Menzies' Invaders from Mars. Released in 1953, the movie would become arguably the most iconic of the subgenre, being the first sci-fi motion picture to be presented in full color and showcasing the absolute best special effects of the era. Serving as an inspiration for many future filmmakers, most notably horror master Tobe Hooper, the movie was originally criticized for its "it was all a dream" cop-out ending. Re-edited for a European market, the second edit would become the now iconic Vision. Still a highly respected picture despite its campy nature, Invaders from Mars just may represent the pinnacle of all sci-fi B-movies.
Invaders from Mars is an interesting film because it's a 50s film that still holds up. I was not excited to watch this film, but what I will say is that it absolutely captured what it was like to be a kid when no one believes you. It is so terrifying, and for a 50s film, it captured it so well. It was done properly, the pacing was fantastic, I enjoyed the story. The only thing I really didn't enjoy was the final reveal of the aliens. I kind of liked not knowing what was after us or like what was the issue. Not too big of a fan of that, but in the same hand too, it is definitely awesome. The pacing was really good and the anxiety was just stress-inducing, and it is definitely worth being on this list.
Number 6. Although falling under the then modern B-movie niche, Predator proved to be much more than it appeared. Possibly the most macho movie of them all, released in 1987, the movie pitches the man-machine Arnold Schwarzenegger and his team of equally trained soldiers against an otherworldly hunter with skills and weaponry far in advance of their own. Directed by John McTiernan, the movie would introduce the world to the now iconic hunter-predator, an advanced alien species that lives purely for sport. Featuring pioneering effects by Rick Baker and spawning one of the most successful franchises in all of media, Predator is one of the most quotable and entertaining sci-fi horror movies of all time.
Oh my God, this film is so good. Again, another one of my childhood favorites. First off, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, you can't go wrong with that. And then you have a malevolent force that is not here to do anything except hunt you. That is sci-fi horror at its best. This is terrifying. Whereas the sequels kind of took it into more of an action route, this is an action film, but it still holds to the genre of horror. It's amazing to me to see how the effects have still held up to this day and how it still is a white-knuckle gripping movie that is amazing to watch time and time again. I think we can all agree that if we think of sci-fi horror, The Predator at least crosses our minds once or twice.
Number 5. From the master of horror John Carpenter comes the iconic They Live. Starring pro wrestler Roddy Piper as a nomadic nobody who discovers the world we live in has been integrated with an alien species. Discovering sunglasses that unveils a subliminal reality that's controlling the population, he sets on a mission to expose the secret society and save humanity from alien control. Opening to immediate praise, the movie would feature one of the greatest street fights ever set to screen alongside co-star Keith David. Almost immediately earning cult status, They Live is still recognized as not only one of the most entertaining political satires, but also one of the most beloved horror movies of the 1980s.
You know, They Live really made me think about where I'm at in my life and what I pay attention to and what I watch. It's not a movie that I was really familiar with as a child. I watched it maybe once or twice, but I was very, very young. Watching it as an adult, not only does it hold up with the effects, it is so unnerving to see how the entire world is basically hidden in plain sight. It's so terrifying, and to think that if you're the only person that knows and you're trying to fight against it, that's even scarier. It had moments that were scary, it had moments that were funny, and it had moments that absolutely had me cheering. I love this film, and I am so happy that it's included on this list.
Number 4. H.G. Wells' legendary story of alien invasion, The War of the Worlds may be the most profound in science fiction history. Released to a more gullible society, the original broadcast would create hysteria, leading many to believe that the dramatization to be a real occurrence. Using the popularity of the broadcast, the movie was granted one of the biggest budgets of its time. What would have typically been another B-movie was given a AAA production budget and delivered one of the most impressive and striking movies of the era. Also inspiring the outstanding musical by Jeff Wayne, The War of the Worlds has been inducted into the National Library of Congress and is recognized as one of the most important movies in sci-fi history.
War of the Worlds. I gotta say, I didn't enjoy this one. This is not a favorite film of mine. If I'm being honest, I really do enjoy the Tom Cruise version better. I don't know, it didn't really sit well with me. It's not my favorite. I definitely will never watch it again. But what I will say is that this film had fantastic sound design. It was staggering to me how great this film sounded, but yet how crappy it looked. Now, some of that does come with the territory of it being in the 50s. As you will see later in this list, sometimes that doesn't matter with the time era. Although it is understandable as to why it is featured, because it is from H.G. Wells, the guy that scared everybody into thinking that aliens were real. Of course, then again, they may be, but that's for a different video.
Number 3. Overlooking the sequel, which focuses more on action, The Terminator features the second appearance of Arnold Schwarzenegger and the first original project of the multi-Oscar winner James Cameron. Taking the formula of the popular slasher, but with a deep cerebral twist, the movie follows a lone soldier sent back in time to protect the unknowing mother of the leader of the resistance, the last remaining soldiers of a future war against the machine uprising, all while being hunted by an unstoppable killing machine. Featuring effects from FX master Dennis Muren and a genre-defining soundtrack by Brad Fiedel, The Terminator is not only one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies of all time, but also one of the greatest and overlooked slashers.
Up next is The Terminator, which is actually how I got my name, from the main good guy, Kyle Reese. Thanks, Mom. However, what I will say is I didn't think about this movie being a sci-fi horror film. It is just a movie to me that was just awesome. I really didn't think about which genre it belonged in, but now that I've investigated it and I've been able to rewatch it, it's absolutely a sci-fi horror film. You have a malevolent force that will not stop until his target is taken care of, and that is so terrifying. Think about that. Something that will not stop until it kills you, and it's from the future sent back through time. Sci-fi horror, baby, and it's done amazingly.
Number 2. Heralded as one of the greatest suspense movies of all time, and showcasing possibly the greatest costumes ever put to screen, Alien is one of the most tensed and imaginative movies ever made. Created by Ridley Scott and inspired by the art of H.R. Geiger, the creature known as the Xenomorph would showcase one of the most disturbing genesis of any monster before or since. Following the directorial style of Jaws, using the what you don't see is scarier method of storytelling, the movie would present a masterclass of film noir and suspense, all packaged in one of the most proficient movies of its time. Winning several Academy Awards, Alien remains one of the greatest movies in the history of horror.
I was so happy to see this on this list. The Xenomorph. How much more terrifying can you get? I can tell you something right now. I would much rather be in a room by myself with all of the other candidates on this list, except for the Xenomorph. Its very life cycle is horrifying. That alone would be enough to make anybody cringe, let alone the malevolent force that it is and the fact that its blood is acid. How much more terrifying can you get than that? It is a fantastic choice for this, and it is definitely something that embodies sci-fi horror. Ridley Scott did an amazing job, even with the sequels, and I absolutely love that Mike chose Alien over Aliens. Thanks, man.
If you enjoy Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. And a huge thank you to Candace Jones as my first top-tier Patreon supporter. Number 1. The ability to overlook the classics in favor of formative pictures serves as an injustice to the culture. The greatest example being The Bride of Frankenstein. For lovers of sci-fi horror, it's occasionally inconceivable that the genre would be nothing more than a niche, if not for a picture that sustainably affirmed it as such. Where Frankenstein was the original sci-fi horror story, and subsequently the original sci-fi horror movie, what this movie created, The Bride of Frankenstein perfected. Continuing the story of Dr. Frankenstein, who's forcefully encouraged by the criminally overlooked villain Dr. Pretorius to create a second monster. Showcasing amazing effects, outstanding acting, a great story, amazing moral, and stunning direction, The Bride of Frankenstein is not only one of the greatest sci-fi horror pictures, but also one of the most significant movies in all of cinema.
The Bride of Frankenstein is a movie that, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't very happy with, and it's not because of the film itself, it's mainly because of the execution. More so in the title. This film is called Bride of Frankenstein. The bride doesn't show up until the last 5 minutes, and maybe that was the whole point, I don't know, but I don't know, it just didn't sit well with me. I was really hoping that we were gonna see maybe some development with the bride and also with Frankenstein. Maybe, I don't know, not for them to have a whole, family and for them to live in a house and pay a mortgage, but in the same hand, I wanted them to be able to show just a little bit of something. It just, I don't know, it fell flat for me. What the movie definitely succeeded at was still holding up from the times. It's mind-boggling to me that a movie from the 50s can be done this well and looks that good. It is such a great choice for number 1, and it is definitely a movie that I can tell inspired many other, if not all, sci-fi horror films.
So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which sci-fi horror movies do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and a huge thank you to Kyle for appearing in this video.
Once again, I just want to thank Mike for giving me the chance to be able to count down the top 10 sci-fi horror films with him. This was so much fun, and I had a blast doing it. As far as what I would change, honestly, I probably would have put Event Horizon, on a higher point on the list, because that film genuinely scared me. To me, I think that definitely is sci-fi horror. Nevertheless, though, I love the choices. I think that probably would have been my only change in gripe, even with War of the Worlds. That still, even though I didn't enjoy it, I get why it's on this list. It's an iconic story, and it's an iconic movie that changed the way that everything works in the film industry, especially with sci-fi horror. Especially when you have Bride of Frankenstein being number 1. Again, I can tell that movie influenced a lot. It just still holds up. This was a fantastic list to be a part of, and Michael, I want to thank you again for letting me be a part of it. So, with that being said, adios, and I will see you guys next time.
Remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. The concept of an individual being resurrected with supernatural abilities has resulted in the creation of many iconic horror villains. Suffice it to say, the classic supervillain has had a profound impact on the horror genre. For the majority of their existence, the superhero movie has been aimed at a multi-generational audience. Typically wholesome and upstanding characters, whether on missions of justice or peace, the majority were created to represent role models for impressionable youths. However, there were several created with a more alternative intention. Despite many holding a basic set of morals, since the 1980s, the anti-hero has become synonymous with dark cinema and produced some of the most beloved movies of the genre. So join me as I count down the top 10 dark superhero movies. For this list, I'll be looking at the very best alternate superhero movies, whether it be a horror movie format or aimed at a more mature audience. I'll also be overlooking manga and anime, as that's a list for another time. Joining me this week, may I welcome back Screaming Shark.
Glad to be back on the show, Mike. I'm Mitch from Screamin' Shark, and you know what? Let's just get right into it, shall we? I like superhero movies, but I love horror movies the most, but you combine the two together, and you got me really interested. Ready when you are, Mike.
Number 10. Starting this list with the most definable horror movie, 2020's Brightburn was a surprise small hit. Sharing many parallels with the DC icon Superman, the movie follows a young boy who discovers he possesses otherworldly strengths and abilities. Twisting the tale, instead of being righteous, the boy is driven by angst and becomes drunk on power. Although receiving mixed reviews, mostly criticized for its parallels, the movie was able to find an audience within the horror community for its deviations and impressive gore. Directed by David Yarovesky and produced by James Gunn, best known for his work in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Brightburn remains a polarizing picture, but still an appreciated dark picture.
This is a weird experiment of a movie. Let's see what would happen if Superman was evil. I love the concept and idea alone, but I found the movie as a whole to be just okay. I think it would have been more interesting if the kid had a slower progression to the dark side, rather than just having him suddenly turn evil right at the start. Other than that, I actually got invested in the parents and what they had to go through with this naughty boy, and those kills. I think they're the most brutal, disturbing, and drawn out you're going to see in any of the movies on this list. The way that guy dies in the truck, oh boy, man, that image is going to be burned into my mind forever. But being a horror fan, that's great.
Number 9. Back in the days when M. Night Shyamalan was considered a visionary director, one of the main movies to gain mass attention was 2002's Unbreakable. The story of an unassuming man who begins to believe not only that superheroes exist, but also he may be one himself. Following a tragic train crash and being the only survivor, David Dunn considers the possibility that he's indestructible. Enforced by the eccentric comic book aficionado Elijah Price, he tests the theory of his potentially immortal nature. Presenting the story in a realistic world made for an oddly engrossing picture, ultimately spawning a franchise of Split and Glass, Unbreakable is still considered the high point of the trilogy.
I've heard nothing but praise for this movie, but I never gave it the chance because I am not a fan of M. Night Shyamalan. But since Unbreakable is on the list, I had to watch it, and you know what? I'm glad I did. In regards to pacing, it's the slowest on the list here, but the story is just so intriguing, and I can watch Bruce Willis as David Dunn all day. I really like the slow build-up. Does he or does he not have superpowers? It got me invested in his character, and I wanted to know for sure what the deal was. Plus, it allowed for some really suspenseful moments. I can't go without mentioning Samuel L. Jackson as Elijah. Despite knowing the whole twist, I still found him to be very likable, fascinating, and pretty funny too.
Number 8. Before the world fully embraced the comic book movie, one of the first pictures to raise the heads of production companies was the '97 violent action thriller Blade. The story of a half-blood vampire vigilante whose mission is to rid the world of those who killed his mother. With the aid of Whistler, an aged arms master with a similar vendetta, the two parry up to take down head vampire Deacon Frost. Although dated by its subpar CGI, the action, style, and respectful approach to the source material made for a thoroughly entertaining dark action movie. Spawning a franchise in its own TV series, Blade arguably remains Wesley Snipes' most iconic performance and has become a heralded picture to both horror and comic book fandoms.
I really don't like Blade. My friend let me borrow the movies, hyped them up to the point that they didn't really work for me, and I was just bored. Except I really enjoyed the third one, which should say something about my taste in movies. I can see why people really like it though. Wesley Snipes gives a solid performance, the swordplay and fighting scenes are shot and choreographed well. The violence, yeah, it's pretty gory, but that's CGI. Oh man, oh. I personally would rather watch either Underworld 1 or 2. That said, I might have lost a bunch of respect for saying Underworld is better than Blade, but that's just me. Sorry.
Number 7. The movie that would fully realize the potential of dark superhero pictures, Tim Burton's Batman would also be the second highest grossing movie of 1989. Shaking the campy facade created by the 60s TV series and presenting The Dark Knight for a more mature audience. The dark tone and violence depicted caused outrage at the time, as many parents complained that the movie was too extreme for the audience it was aimed at. Following the controversy, alongside other dark movies of the time, the PG-13 rating was created in response, forever changing the tone of child-friendly pictures. But despite the furor, it was also mutually agreed by cinema lovers that Batman was a defining vision and the genesis of dark superhero movies. Despite the controversy, the movie became one of the biggest of its year, praised for its dark presentation, multi-generational themes, and fully establishing Tim Burton as a visionary director.
This movie and I go way back to when I was just a little guy. Now realizing it's a bit of a slow burn and pretty dark, I'm amazed that as a 7-year-old, I really enjoyed everything that this movie had to offer. I've always been interested in the villains, and at the time, Jack Nicholson was it. I laughed along with him as he chewed up every scene he's in, but all the twisted, evil things he does to his victims just went right over my head as a kid. Even Batman himself is kind of ruthless here. I also pretty much gush over the gothic visuals, and that grand score really makes Batman '89 feel epic, but yet mysterious.
Number 6. Overlooked by most as a superhero movie, as it did not originate from comic books, the hyper-violent sci-fi classic RoboCop is one of the greatest unsung examples. The story of Alex Murphy, a new cop in a futuristic Detroit who is executed on his first call-out. Rebuilt as a cybernetic law enforcer, equipped with eagle-eye shooting accuracy, analytic vision, bulletproofing, super strength, and a built-in arsenal of weaponry, the true beauty of the movie is Murphy's mission to rediscover his own identity. Featuring stand-down animatronics by Phil Tippett, it was also the first American project for future award-winning director Paul Verhoeven. Creating one of the most iconic heroes in sci-fi, RoboCop is not simply an all-out sci-fi action movie, but also a deep psychological thriller.
I think it was back in 2011 I fished out a tape from TV copy of RoboCop from our garage, and I instantly fell in love. Not even a month later, I was already making my own RoboCop films.
Who the hell is this guy? I don't know.
I never considered it to be a superhero movie, but it definitely plays out like a dark comic book with its story, horrific violence, and comic-like cinematography. RoboCop / Alex Murphy is a much more complex character than you would initially think based on the title and poster, but there's more to him than just Robot Man shoot bad guys, which he still does that in the movie, and it's one of the best parts of it. You want to see him deliver justice to the ones who killed him, and he doesn't disappoint. Just mwah, RoboCop. What a thrill.
Number 5. Although lacking the traditional superpowers, the character of V for Vendetta, is a very different kind of superhero. Inspired by the failed exploits of Guy Fawkes, a British extremist who threatened to destroy the House of Lords in the late 1800s. The movie contemplates the legend in a mirrored modern setting. Ultimately intending to destroy the government, the true story is to be found in his ambiguous attempt to be understood by Evie, his accidental captive, and her journey from blind civilian to an enlightened freedom fighter. Released in 2005, V for Vendetta would showcase outstanding action choreography, an excellent satire on government, and would secretly serve as a British seasonal picture.
I remember my sister watching this movie all the time. She says it's her favorite movie. I always thought it was going to be long, somewhat boring, and blah blah blah. This movie surprised me the most because, like my sister, I loved V for Vendetta. The character of V is definitely a huge component in making this movie entertaining and interesting. He's mysterious, dangerous, but he's maybe the most likable anti-hero on this list because of his viewpoints on the government and solely his charm. He pretty much tortures our main character in order to make her realize her own strength, but then he'll whip her up a delicious breakfast. It has something to say, and it says it well without being too pandering, and it's actually entertaining. Plus, it's pretty violent, and I dig that.
Number 4. From one of the most beloved graphic novels of the 1980s comes the cinematic adaptation of Alan Moore's Watchmen. Originally hoping for a release in 1986, the movie would take over 20 years to finally see the big screen. Released in 2009 and written for screen by David Hayter, best known as Solid Snake of the Metal Gear franchise, the movie was immediately praised by fans for its mostly respectful translation. Featuring a career-defining performance by Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, the movie tells the story of discovering the murderer of a former hero. In a world where heroes are considered criminal nuance, a former team reband to discover the sinister plot that one of their own intends to kill millions of innocent lives. Never shying away from any of the graphic violence and delivering one of the most original stories, Watchmen remains one of the most respected pictures in the comic book universe.
I never gave Watchmen the chance it deserved back when it first came out. All I ever heard was, "This ain't Batman." Hearing that, I was like, no thank you. I eventually came around and I watched it, and I just thought it was okay. I watched it again, the director's cut this time, and I really got into it, despite already knowing all the twists and turns. My favorite is Rorschach and how unapologetic he is towards scum. This movie really holds up a mirror and shows us just how shitty we are as a human race. I love the scene when he recalls the child murderer and marking him as his first kill, and ooh, is it gruesome. Definitely the best meat cleaver kill I have ever seen. Oh, this ain't Batman. Yeah, no shit, this ain't Batman.
Number 3. Perhaps the best response to an industry that was finally realizing the potential of violence. Following the success of Deadpool, Wolverine would finally be fully unleashed in the brutally visceral picture Logan. Intended to be the final outing for Hugh Jackman, the movie sees an aged and failing mutant who discovers he's been cloned in the shape of an illegitimate daughter, tasking himself as her protector from a second clone, an exact replica of his younger self. Earning mass attention from critics and fans alike for presenting the character in his most honest and respectable envisioning, Logan stands tall as the greatest picture in the entire X-Men cinematic universe.
Now here's a solo Wolverine movie that finally did Wolverine right and didn't do him dirty like the previous two. It proved that an X-Men movie can be much more than a bunch of tight-wearing mutants fighting each other, but can tell a very emotional story. That's also filled with a lot of cussing and a lot of blood. I remember hearing about all the violence, and when I watched it for myself, I was taken back because it lived up to the hype. And it's not just there to be cool though, but to represent where Logan is emotionally, fed up, growing old, and slowly dying. Truly the first time when I actually cared and feared for him since he's no longer invincible. There's one scene in particular involving Professor X, which I won't spoil, but that scene, oh, it's shocking.
Number 2. The second installment of the Christopher Nolan trilogy, The Dark Knight sees the Caped Crusader against what many believe to be the greatest interpretation of the Joker. Representing the character's purest form of anarchy, the movie fully explored the extent of the Joker's capabilities, presenting him as his only drive being that of pure chaos. Featuring some of the most impressive action set pieces ever set to screen, the movie would sadly be the penultimate performance of Heath Ledger, earning him a posthumous Academy Award. Also featuring the easily overlooked Two-Face, also played to key perfection by Aaron Eckhart, The Dark Knight is recognized as the greatest cinematic interpretation of the Caped Crusader to date.
I saw The Dark Knight in the uncomfortable pit of the movie theater, the very front row, but that did not matter. I was sucked right into that world of Gotham City and followed every single step each character took, and I loved it. All I asked for Christmas was a chair and a copy of The Dark Knight. I didn't get the chair, but I did get that Steelbook DVD, and I would just constantly watch all the Joker scenes. I'm pretty sure that's what everybody was doing, because we are still talking about Heath Ledger's Joker. But you know what we're not talking about enough? How Harvey Dent / Two-Face was so well handled, and how many dogs Batman threw to their deaths. Now that's dark. Really messed up.
If you enjoy Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon? Links in the description box below. And a huge thank you to Candace Jones as my first top tier patron. Number 1. There are few movies that were able to capture an original author's vision so respectively. Released in 1994, The Crow would become one of the most genre-defining pictures of the cinematic comic universe. Starring Brandon Lee as a resurrected being, who's given 3 days to seek vengeance upon those responsible for the murder of his beloved and himself. Overseen by the actual author, the movie would not only affirm that comic book pictures were not simply a genre for young audiences, but also for adults. Popularizing the gothic subculture of the 1990s, the movie would also affirm Lee's character Eric Draven as a pop culture icon, and also bring dark and new wave music into the forefront of album sales. Despite the production claiming the life of Brandon Lee, what emerged from the tragedy served as a darkly beautiful and heartfelt tribute to one of the potentially greatest action stars of his generation.
I've heard about The Crow countless times, especially when it comes to what tragically happened to Brandon Lee during the production, but I never took people's recommendations to watch it until now, and I have to say, it's pretty good. It wasn't what I was exactly expecting, which in my mind was Blade with a lot more brooding around to heavy rock and roll, shot in an art house kind of way. What you actually get is a simple revenge plot that jumps right into the meat of things, which at first is a little jarring, but as the movie moves along, you learn what happened to Eric, and you just want to see the people responsible to suffer just as much as he did, if not more. I also had no idea that the character was going to be so charismatic and charming. Yeah, I felt for him, but I surprisingly laughed along with him in the more upbeat moments that I didn't see coming at all. So if you're in the mood for a dark comic book movie, I would definitely recommend checking out The Crow.
So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which dark superhero movies do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and a huge thank you to Mitchell for appearing in this episode.
Thanks, Mike, for having me again. It was a real blast. If this was my own list, though, I would have swapped out Blade for another movie, but so stupid of me. I don't remember exactly what film I would have swapped it out with. So unprofessional of me. Man, why can't I remember that movie? Oh well, this was Mitchell from Screaming Shark, and just letting you know to just drop by sometime and check out some of the videos that I got.
Be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. In the hands of competent directors, it's been proved that it's possible to recapture or reignite the love for a previously established movie. However, it's become commonplace for studios to hire cheap, unknown directors to helm these kinds of projects. Hoping to ride the shirt tails of the respective movies, these have rarely resulted in notable releases. Typically created with the intention of solely cashing in on a namesake, the horror community has become inundated with a slew of deeply disappointing pictures, generating mass pessimism throughout. This trend has also been applied to highly respected foreign pictures, which over time has created some of the most embarrassing pictures in cinema history. And today, we'll be looking at the very worst. So join me as I count down the top 10 worst horror remakes. For this list, I'll be looking at the very worst examples of horror cinema remakes. Whether it be a readaptation, direct recreation, or an international translation, it's eligible for this list. I'll also be overlooking made-for-TV movies, as that's a list for another time. So let's begin. Number 10. George Romero's sequel Day of the Dead is a contender for the greatest zombie movie of all time. 2008's cash-in remake is a contender for the worst. Following the success of the respectable update of Dawn of the Dead in 2004, the rush to release the follow-up would ultimately be the series' undoing. Only loosely following the original narrative and choosing to tell its own story. Written by Jeffrey Reddick, best known for his screenplays for the Final Destination franchise, the movie deviates from its established social satire into an uninspired and underwhelming chore of a story. Upon test screenings, the movie was received so poorly that it became a straight-to-video release. Also featuring a confusing recasting of Ving Rhames, Day of the Dead is now seen as mostly as an embarrassment to the franchise. Number 9. Following the success of The Ring and The Grudge, Asian horror fast became a heralded genre, a genre that all but ended with the release of the Western adaptation of One Missed Call. The tale of a mysterious phone call that leaves messages from the point of the owner's future death. Starring Shannon Sossamon, who delivers an uninvested lead performance. What truly made this a forgettable picture was the complete lack of atmosphere, recycling the plot devices of other similar movies, and ultimately relying on jump scares for the majority of the runtime. Although turning a moderate box office return, One Missed Call is considered the worst conversion of J-horror to date, and recognized as the picture that killed the trend of westernizing Asian cinema. Number 8. Recognized as one of the greatest examples of extreme cinema, translated for an English-speaking audience, Martyrs became one of the most disappointing conversions of modern times. Never even attempting to achieve the poignancy of its origin, but choosing to play the material overly safe, the movie was presented as a heavily diluted rendition. The sheer cowardice of the filmmakers transformed such a profound picture into nothing more than a superficial cash grab, making one of the most memorable finales in cinema history into a bland and meaningless ending. Despite the original being highly praised, the lack of any interest or actual effort in the remake makes Martyrs a relievingly obscure picture. Number 7. As one of the genesis pictures of the slasher movement, a remake of 1980's Prom Night was inevitable. Released in 2008, the updated version became instantly recognized as one of the worst movies of the genre. Following the story of Donna, a girl whose family were killed by her obsessed former teacher, who on her prom night again becomes victim of his return. Despite the iconic status of the original, it's still an underwhelming slasher, devolved into a color-by-numbers adaptation by apparently unskilled filmmakers, showing no attempt at making a competent picture. Utilizing every cliché in the book, all with the poorest of execution, Prom Night is nothing more than a perfect example of how not to make a horror movie. Number 6. From John Carpenter's iconic picture comes 2005's The Fog. Having issues with his original movie, it would actually be Carpenter to suggest his movie be remade. Serving as a silent producer, the final product would become an embarrassment. Although following the premise of the original, The remake features bland characters performed by unskilled actors, pointless side stories, a complete lack of atmosphere, and subpar CGI even by 2005 standards. Winning the 2006 Stinker Award for Least Scary Horror Movie, using every worn-out horror cliché in the book, The Fog is the epitome of lazy and uninspired filmmaking, has become a go-to movie when referencing horror remakes that shame their own origin. Number 5. Released at the peak of the 80s slasher movement, April Fool's Day became a minor hit. Earning itself a small cult following was the basis for the 2008 update. The movie follows a vengeful killer who supposedly died in an April Fool's prank the previous year. Originally intended to be a direct remake, the plot would be updated to suit modern trends. Instead of creating an original take around the core of the narrative, chose to recycle existing narratives that had already become stale and outdated, peppering the picture with unimaginative and predictable scares. To seasoned horror fans, April Fool's Day is nothing more than a disappointing chore of dated cliches that showcases every reason why horror is considered lowbrow entertainment to cinephiles. Number 4. Possibly the most expected picture on this list due to the social media bandwagon, The Wicker Man is one of the few movies that lives up to its infamous nature. Starring Nicolas Cage in possibly his most recognized eccentric role, the movie keeps the basic beats of the source but presented in an overly bizarre narrative. Already being a darkly intricate picture, the 2006 adaptation would replace the entirety of the subtle details with nonsensical subplots, ultimately driving the picture into multiple dead ends. Unlike many other movies on this list, the saving grace is Nicolas Cage's performance, which makes The Wicker Man an oddly watchable movie, with his hyper reactions creating a novel curiosity to simply see what his over-the-top character will do next. Number 3. Eli Roth is without question a polarizing name in the horror community. Finding initial success in the indie hit movie Cabin Fever, nobody expected a remake so soon. Producing the movie himself, Roth originally intended it to be the 4th installment. Instead, chose to reboot his already existing franchise, releasing just 2 years after Patient Zero. Condensing the original story for a faster pace, the movie would not only strip any character development, but also removing the slightest passion for filmmaking, choosing not to bring anything new to the narrative but create an almost identical picture. Releasing to unanimously scathing reviews, possibly making Cabin Fever the most successfully disappointing franchise in modern horror. Number 2. Every so often, a movie comes along that absolutely nobody asked for. Recognized as one of the greatest psychological horror movies of all time, the remake of Jacob's Ladder is by far one of the most unnecessary. Starring Michael Ealy as Jacob, a doctor who suffers from progressively more disturbing hallucinations following the death of his brother. Lacking any of the profundity of its source, altering the character's backstory which in turn steals any impact upon the story arc, stripping all of the intrigue, dread, and atmosphere, presenting the narrative as nothing more than a color-by-numbers psychological thriller. Even without comparing to the original, Jacob's Ladder is a predictable, unimaginative, and generically bland chore of a movie. There is, however, one picture that surpasses them all. If you enjoyed Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, Have you seen future Top 10s and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. And a very special thank you to Candace Jones as my top tier patron. Number 1. There is no true way to explain the boredom and irritation of seeing the 1998 remake of Carnival of Souls. Stripped completely of its atmosphere and barely resembling the original, the movie tells of a young girl who, after witnessing the murder of her own mother by a carnival clown, is attacked by the killer and begins hallucinating his return. Originally being a beloved dark tale of stalker and victim, the remake would feature none of the character depth, intrigue, or notable acting. Starring Bobby Phillips and a pre-Saw Shawnee Smith, perhaps the most curious addition to the movie was the inclusion of Wes Craven. Splattered across all of the advertising media in a vain attempt to stir interest by the attachment of the horror master's name. Not even enjoyable in a so good it's bad way, Carnival of Souls is recognized not only as one of the worst movies in horror, but also one of the worst movies of all time. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which horror remakes do you hate the most? Leave a comment below and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Taking a break from my usual format of alternate cinema, for this episode I'm expanding into alternate video gaming. Games that explore or are inspired by the dark and macabre. Being the first generation of consoles to fully explore 3D graphics was also able to explore new experiences in atmospheric gameplay. Despite there being several notable video games to explore themes of horror, Generation 5 is considered the progenitor of horror gaming as an established niche. Even though developing from relatively no experience in the theme, we were graced with many outstanding titles, several of which would go on to become global phenomena, some even transcending into some of the most beloved multimedia franchises across the world, and today we'll be looking at the very best. So join me as I count down the top 10 Generation 5 video games. For this list, I'll be looking at the very best horror games released on the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64. Joining me this week, please welcome Mr. Johnny Deadly.
Hey everybody, Johnny Deadly from the Gorecast here. Very happy to be back on Demented Pictures Top 10s again. I've been a big fan of the horror genre since I was a little kid, and once horror started to creep into the world of video games, I found it truly intoxicating to be fully immersed in these horror-like scenarios and get to play my own character or get to play out the whole scene of a horror movie or that kind of vibe in video games. And the horror genre beginnings could not be anywhere more prevalent than on the Generation 5 consoles. So today, we will only be talking about one game per franchise. There won't be any re-releases that have been brought out from previous things onto the Generation 5 consoles, so don't expect to see Doom or Alone in the Dark or anything like that showing up on the list today. And other than that, let's begin.
Number 10. Considered by some to be the goriest game ever made, Phantasmagoria would stand among its peers as the only extreme full-motion video game of its kind. Originally releasing on Windows and MS-DOS, would later be ported to the Sega Saturn. The game would become almost legendary for its over-the-top gore and insane death scenes. The basic gameplay is that of a simple point-and-click adventure, following the story of author Adrian Delaney, who inherits a colossal mansion, infested with supernatural specters with a maniacal and savage thirst for disembowelment, which give to the now iconic cutscenes. Despite its lackluster gameplay, what makes Phantasmagoria worthy of the number 10 spot is its unforgettable experience in shock horror, utilizing real actors and practical effects to create one of the first experiences in extreme gore media.
Phantasmagoria isn't just one of the first extreme horror gore experiences, it's still one of the most brutal by even today's standards in my opinion. It's one of the ones on the list that Mike had brought up that I hadn't actually played until I saw what was on the list, and having played it over the week, some of those kills are absolutely insane, especially for the year that it came out. The fact that it's full motion video and you're seeing it happen to actual people instead of just computer generated characters makes it even that little bit more brutal. And some of the topics that they bring up in the actual storyline, especially with the development of the main protagonist's girlfriend or boyfriend or husband, I can't remember which one it is, but his transcendence into crazy evil motherfucker is on par.
Number 9. Originally making headway in the arcades before being ported to the Sega Saturn, comes Sega's The House of the Dead. Taking the popular style of Virtua Cop and Time Crisis, the game plunges you into an intense shootout with a host of zombies and nightmare creatures. Boasting an eccentric B-movie presentation, complete with appalling voice acting, these aesthetics would ultimately add to the overall entertainment value. Although only a short game lasting an average of 30 minutes over 4 stages, the story sees the player take down the mansion of mad scientist Curian in a quest to save the damsel Sophie. Spawning several sequels and the eccentric spin-off game The Typing of the Dead, The House of the Dead packs an intense and highly entertaining experience in zombie blasting action and is recognized as one of the greatest action shooters of the 1990s.
House of the Dead was one of those games when it was in the arcades. I lost a whole bunch of my pocket money to it over the years. I remember they used to have these black curtains around it in the arcades over here so that younger kids, i.e. me at the time, weren't able to see what was going on in relation to the zombie madness behind the curtain. Of course, we used to get in there, get a game or two, but then finally it came to the Sega Saturn where you were able to have the whole arcade experience at home because there was the light guns, which was revolutionary at the time, bringing the arcade from arcade to your living room, and on top of that, bringing zombies from the arcade to blow up in some gory, effects-laden fashions all over your living room as well. I would say House of the Dead is probably one of the best games of that genre from the 90s.
Number 8. Following the boom of popularity of dinosaurs in the 1990s, one of the greatest responses was Capcom's second installment of the short-lived survival horror franchise Dino Crisis. Released by the powerhouse production company Capcom in 2000, and set in the futuristic year of 2010, the game continues the story of Regina from the original game, transported back in time to survive a giant military base infested with carnivorous dinosaurs. Adapting the gameplay from the previous installment to suit a more action-based experience, mixing up the format to include new characters and an insistence of destroying everything. Although sadly lacking the fear factor of its predecessor, the sequel would prove to be the superior game, and despite sharing many similarities with other games of the genre, Dino Crisis 2 presented enough proficiency, solid gameplay, and intense action to be recognized as one of the greatest on the platform.
Right, I have to say off the bat, Dino Crisis 2, I literally only played that over the weekend because this was on the list. I had no interest after playing Dino Crisis 1. I had found that so boring and just a lackluster, dinosaur-laden version of Resident Evil 1. This, on the other hand, now that I've finally got to give it a go and get over the hump, this is a whole lot of fun, which is the complete opposite of what the normal one was, where you literally just get ammo and go murdering a whole lot of freaking psycho dinosaurs that are running around the place. Whole different beast of a game compared to what the first one was, and I think it's for the better.
Number 7. Releasing at the end of the Sega Saturn's lifespan, Deep Fear would sadly become an obscure video game, but also remembered as one of the greatest for the system. Taking place on a sunken oceanic naval base, after coming into contact with an alien virus, the crew of the facility undergo monstrous mutations. Again sharing many parallels with other survival horror games of the time, what makes the title stand out among its peers is the unyielding tension of an ever-depleting air supply, creating an unnerving mechanic of constantly fighting not only an infestation of creatures, but also the ability to breathe. Although often remembered for its appalling voice acting, Deep Fear delivers a familiar yet individual experience that may be the most underappreciated hidden-gen horror game of them all.
God damn it, Sega Saturn, I gotta give you credit where credit is due. Deep Fear, I know it's, look, we'll call a spade a spade. It is a Resident Evil clone, but when you're going to clone something, at least do it a little bit different. And Deep Fear brought in so many really cool little mechanics in there that weren't seen in any of the other games. Like, instead of having to go and just find cards and things in lockers, they had actual people there for you to interact with, and they'd have a higher level of clearance for you to be able to go get better weapons or things like that. The whole undersea setting is really, really interesting. The monsters looked really good. The voice acting was terrible, admittedly, I can't deny that whatsoever. But you did a Resident Evil game, and you did it different, and you did it your own way, and by God, I really enjoyed it. And I totally agree, this is an underrated game that a lot of people, if you do get the chance, should go back and play.
Number 6. Following the colossal success of Final Fantasy VII, Square's following project Parasite Eve would bring the horror genre into the action RPG format. Serving as a sequel to the book of the same name, the story follows Aya, a detective who witnesses the mutation and evolution of Eve, a being with the ability to force spontaneous combustion upon humans and control the DNA of all living beings. Set in Manhattan, your mission is to prevent the birth of a new form of supreme being, all the while having to survive an onslaught of genetically manipulated creatures. Even managing to create some impressively unsettling moments. What impressed them most was the game's intricate lore and outstanding cinematic presentation, even spawning its own cinematic adaptation and inspiring the Bring Me the Horizon song of the same name. Parasite Eve is a franchise that many horror gaming fans are eager to see revived.
I was always a big fan of Parasite Eve when it came out on the PS1 from day one, because I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy VII and those turn-based JRPG style games, and this had the JRPG style look, but it also had the horror elements of Resident Evil 1 and the survival horror elements of Resident Evil 1, but yet also kind of had the turn-based combat system of those JRPGs that I spoke of before. It was a very interesting combination of game styles all merged into one, with a really good story, really good FMVs, and some bloody gross monsters, and a flaming opera scene that can't be beaten.
Number 5. Although being a movie licensed game, Alien Trilogy is an overlooked contender for one of the greatest. Only loosely following the narrative of the movies, you take control of Ellen Ripley, now as a colonial marine on a first-person mission to eradicate the xenomorph species from a derelict prison facility. Benefiting from the limitations of the generation's processors, allowing for only a short visual field, only intensifies the ability to be preyed upon, which is also further enhanced by the outstanding sound design. Utilizing the various genus of aliens from facehuggers to multiple queens, it would also be the first ever game to utilize motion capture to animate NPCs. Also featuring dialogue lifted directly from the pictures, further immersing the player into the Alien universe. Despite its limitations and aged appearance, Alien Trilogy still delivers an intense and atmospheric experience to which many claim is the best video game created from the Alien franchise to date.
I'm going to have to disagree with you, dude, on several points on this. Number one, I have to say, to date, the best Alien game in relation to the franchise is Alien Isolation. Hands down, it's the most terrifying Alien-related experience you're ever going to have in your life. I enjoy my first-person shooters. If anyone watches my Twitch, I'm always on first-person shooters. I had issues with this even back in the day. It was very clunky. I found the alien maneuvering around the way they did it in a zigzaggy pattern to be just very annoying, especially considering how it was very hard to aim with the controls the way it was laid out back then. The only thing that ever brought me back to this on repeated occasions is I bloody love Aliens as a game, and it was just nice to be able to run around with a gun in that general world.
Number 4. Set 1500 years after the previous installment, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver tells the story of Raziel, a fallen evolution of the vampire who is revived by an elder god to seek vengeance upon his own brethren, before ultimately confronting Kain, the monster responsible for his demise. Exploring the post-apocalyptic fictional world of Nosgoth, the most intuitive mechanic of the game would be the ability to shift between realities, things in between the physical and spectral realms to manipulate and traverse the layout of the world, with one of the most standout features being the relatively stunning aesthetics and the grotesque and cerebral boss battles. Despite suffering a lackluster resolution, which would eventually be concluded in the sequel, the Journey of the Soul Reaver remains a beloved entry of horror gaming. With the franchise seemingly abandoned since 2003, many gamers still hope to return to Nosgoth to recapture this truly unique vampire lore.
I'll tell you something for nothing. I'm one of those people that wants to go back to Nosgoth. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver and Legacy of Kain in general is my jam. I loved Legacy of Kain itself. With the top-down version when that came out, I was such a big fan. I was only playing that a couple of weeks ago myself. I love it. I love that game. And then when I heard there was a sequel coming, and when it was gone 3D and it was gone action-adventure style, and you got all the vampire powers and you're able to go fight all the different styles of vampires, and your man evolved as the game was going on with different abilities and things like that, it was a truly unique vampire-related gaming experience, and I loved every second of it.
Number 3. From the well-established franchise Castlevania comes the 10th installment, Symphony of the Night. The first game to feature Alucard as the main protagonist and popularized the non-linear style of narrative. Steeped in European Gothic aesthetics, the story sees the return of Dracula's castle and also of Richter Belmont, the previous hero from Rondo of Blood. Setting forth to destroy the castle and handicapped by death himself, your mission is to navigate Alucard through the labyrinthine castle and help restore his abilities to take down the monstrous re-envisioning of Dracula. Defying convention and remaining in a two-dimensional perspective caused some to believe that the lack of generational adaptation to be behind the times, but for those who played the game, saw it as a mastery of the genre. Although opening to rave reviews, Symphony of the Night suffered poor sales, but eventually became a word-of-mouth sensation, which over time is now recognized by many as the greatest entry in the entire Castlevania franchise.
I have to wholeheartedly agree. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is the best in the franchise, and I'm a big fan of the franchise in general, wearing my Castlevania t-shirt right now, represent. The reason this game was so good was because it was a literal love letter from the production team to the franchise in general. They brought the older characters back, even tying in the whole Alucard story, bringing in the Richter versus Dracula fight that was literally at the end of, I think it was Rondo of Blood, if memory serves me correctly, tying both games in together perfectly, bringing back some of the old monsters that have shown up from the games, making some new monsters. They were really inventive in the way that they revolutionized the game by bringing in the Japanese role-playing game elements into it while still keeping the platforming hack and slash vibe going, and instead of having it completely linear, it was an absolute exploration around this breathtaking castle with lovely scenery and the whole inventiveness of just flipping the castle upside down and giving you a 200% game to play. Absolutely brilliant. I love Castlevania so much.
Number 2. Possibly the most well-known horror gaming franchise of them all, Resident Evil 2 is an unquestionable classic. Taking everything learned from the first installment and creating what many believe to be the greatest game of the series. Splitting the narrative into 2 campaigns and furthering the pulp cinema format. Taking control of Claire Redfield and Leon Kennedy, the game throws you into the center of Raccoon City to take down the creator of the G-Virus, William Birkin, an ever-evolving mutation. Also introducing Mr. X, who would also become an iconic villain. The game fully established the franchise, which would evolve into possibly the most successful horror franchise of all time. Expanding into comic books, anime, and a hugely successful movie series. Also receiving an outstanding remake in 2019, Resident Evil 2 just may be the greatest horror action game of them all.
I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil games in general, but when it came to Generation 5, Resident Evil 2, in my opinion, has to be where it's at. It keeps all of the fear and tension and claustrophobia that you do get from Resident Evil 1, but brings you into Raccoon City where you get to go around and explore a little bit more. You have a lot more zombies to run into. There's a lot more weapons that you're able to get your hands on, so defense and everything is a little bit better. The storyline is brilliant. The voice acting has been kicked up a whole notch, and I really just like Leon as a character in general.
Before we get to number 1, if you enjoy Demented Top Tens, Show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future top 10s and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. And a huge shout out to Candace Jones as my top tier patron. Number 1. One of the most difficult to decide number 1s of the series goes to 1999's Silent Hill, taking the title simply for its unparalleled experience in horror. Taking control of Harry Mason, who finds himself stranded within the ghost town of Silent Hill, searching for his lost daughter Cheryl, while having to overcome ever-changing realities that are falling into a nightmarish dimension, infested with a host of demented and twisted creatures, affecting the player on a psychological level that had never before been witnessed in gaming. As you progress through the town, you uncover more and more genuinely unsettling situations, all while being absorbed into some of the most darkly beautiful aesthetics of its time. Another main contribution is the outstanding original music, created by acclaimed composer Akira Yamaoka, enhancing the raw cerebral immersion into the narrative. Featuring phenomenal sound design, an eerie artistic aesthetic, and a highly polished experience in psychological horror, Silent Hill ticks every box for being a perfect game of its generation.
I have to agree, Silent Hill was such an absolute experience when it came out first on the PlayStation 1. I remember it absolutely shit me up when I was a teenager. Probably shouldn't have been playing it in a dark room, but that's a different story for a different day. The gameplay was very unique, where you didn't really have a lot of weaponry to be able to defend yourself or anything. It was mostly exploring around trying to find your lost daughter. The fog that is laid out all over Silent Hill is your worst enemy in that game, because horrible beasties and a whole assortment of nasty things can just jump out at any second and absolutely wreck your shizzle at the drop of a hat. The lack of defense that you have during the game is absolutely terrifying. The claustrophobia you get when you get into some of the buildings is absolutely terrifying. Even when you're out in the open, there is still this claustrophobic feel because the fog is surrounding all over you and everything like that. The soundtrack was great. The monster designs were absolutely brilliant. Silent Hill was the epitome of how games should go in relation to horror on Generation 5.
So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which Generation 5 games do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and a huge thank you to Johnny for appearing in this episode.
Cheers for having me on again, DP. It's been an absolute pleasure as usual. If you're interested in seeing myself and the guys doing our thing during the week, we're over on YouTube on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Sundays, where we're going to be talking about loads of horror movies, horror games and all that kind of thing. And we also have the Gorecast TV show over on American Horror's Roku, Glue TV and Tubi TV every Sunday night, 8:30pm CST, whatever that equates to is GMTs, where you're going to be able to see us doing a whole bunch of horror sketches, horror short films, movie reviews and all of that kind of thing as well. And we're on all the usual platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and thanks for having me on again.
Remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. Of the plethora of iconic movie monsters, there are few to surpass the popularity of the zombie. Appearing in many cultures' folklore, the concept of an undying soulless body has been a mainstay of society for several centuries. Believed to be taken from the word "nzombi," meaning God, where others believe the meaning to be body without a soul, the zombie was first brought to the screen in the early 1930s, which has since been welcomed into the world of pop culture. In almost 100 years of cinema, there have been countless interpretations into the lore of the undead, and today we'll be looking at the very best. So join me as I count down the top 10 zombie movies. For this list, I'll be looking at the greatest zombie movies of all time. I'm also being flexible with what defines being requisite of the niche, allowing for the inclusion of certain pictures. Joining me this week, please welcome Bojangles of Talk Horror.
What's up everyone, Steven aka Bojangles here from Talk Horror, and I'm so happy to be doing this list with Demented. I love zombie films. So much gore, so much violence, so much potential to have to kill a loved one. There's a lot involved with this genre, and I feel like it's really going to give me and Demented something to sink our teeth into. Now keep in mind we're only covering one entry per franchise. No remakes, no reboots. so let's get this bad boy started.
Number 10. Considered by some as the godfather of gore, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond is a rare entry into the world of cosmic horror. Following the story of Liza Merrill, a city girl who inherits a hotel, unknowing that it was site of a ritualistic sacrifice that opened a gateway into a hellish dimension. Discovering a doorway that allows entry for otherworldly creatures into reality, Lisa's world is slowly consumed by a legion of the undead. The second feature of the Gates of Hell trilogy besides City of the Living Dead and House by the Cemetery, the movie caused immediate controversy, not releasing until 1983 in North America as it was considered too extreme for the time and didn't receive an uncut release until 1998. Although featuring dated practical effects, the movie is not without its charm, showcasing many scenes of unsettling and graphic horror, and although a polarizing movie due to its surrealistic elements, to lovers of horror, The Beyond is an unquestionable classic.
It's fitting that The Beyond take 10th place on this list because we're seriously scraping the bottom of the barrel if we're going to include this. In all seriousness, not a big fan of this one. It is cool that they're not your typically infected humans, so it does give you something a little bit different, and it's a Lucio Fulci film, so there's definitely going to be some gory moments which are totally awesome. And I think there were 3 eye gouges, so the movie is worth watching just for those alone. Still, I am conflicted as to whether or not this constitutes as a zombie flick. They're possessed by demons, so going by that logic, if they're zombies, then the Deadites in Evil Dead would be considered zombies as well.
Number 9. Intending to cash in on the popularity of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, Zombie 2 was released without a precursor movie. However, the picture would surpass its marketing technique and become recognized as its own entity. Again directed by Lucio Fulci and using Haitian lore, the movie tells of a daughter searching for her father on a Caribbean island that's also home to the undead, becoming one of the main offenders of the video nasty furor of 1984, alongside Cannibal Holocaust and Last House on the Left, branded for its extreme horror and disturbing visuals. Featuring the most disturbing interpretations of its time and one of the most insane stunts ever performed in cinema, that being a fight scene with an actual live shark. Releasing to even greater success than its pseudo-prequel, Zombie 2 remains a highly praised picture in the zombie genre.
You can't have a top 10 zombie movies list without, well, zombie. Seriously, this has one of the best eye gouges in horror movie history, a zombie shark fight. How the hell did they pull that off? And those Italians sure love their tatas. But seriously, this is an amazing flick with some amazing practical effects. Don't be surprised if you become paralyzed with fear, as do most of the protagonists in this movie. By the end of it, you really start to feel the desperation of the characters weighing on you. Honestly, I'm surprised Zombie didn't make it higher on this list. Being ranked this close to The Beyond makes me hungry for your brains, Demented. Whoa.
Number 8. Expanding what qualifies as a zombie, Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later is truly deserving of being included. Excluding any form of supernatural abilities and working purely as a viral epidemic. Telling the story of Jim, an everyman who awakens after 28 days following a coma to a post-apocalyptic homeland. Soon learning the populace has fallen victim to maniacal rage. Upon discovering other survivors, the movie becomes a race to find safe haven, all to discover that not all monsters are the infected. Featuring a profound statement on society, the success of the movie is credited to the boom of zombie movies of the 2000s, and also proved that the genre was welcome in the world of pop culture on a major scale. Filled with heartbreak, jaw-dropping cinematography, intense bloody action, and outstanding character writing, 28 Days Later also hones one of the most haunting soundtracks and remains one of the greatest British horror movies of the 21st century.
28 Days Later, huh? Well, if you're a fan of the fast-moving zombies, then you gotta give it up to this film, because it's the granddaddy. I'm not going to dig out my horror movie history books right now, but it is definitely the first movie I can remember with fast zombies, and it was a thing of brutal beauty. These zombies freaking mean it. They can't be bargained with. They can't be reasoned with. They don't feel pity or remorse or fear, and they absolutely will not stop ever until you're dead. I freaking love this movie. But seriously, I'm gonna have to be right back. I'm gonna have to go up my cardio game if I'm gonna survive this. So take it away for now, Demented.
Number 7. From the warped mind that brought The Lord of the Rings to the big screen, Peter Jackson's Dead Alive would release to immediate high status as the then goriest movie of its time. Originally making his name as a shock horror prodigy, the movie tells of Lionel, a mama's boy who becomes keeper to a horde of zombies, including his own mother. Despite the insane practical effects, what also made the movie shine was its inclusion of equally insane humor, making for one of the most laugh-out-loud features of its time. Interestingly, Jackson would unite the movie with his future blockbuster King Kong and are officially set within the same universe, unexpectedly answering the question to the result of zombie procreation, and releasing to theaters with an accompanying barf bag. Dead Alive is one of the most entertaining and quotable gore fests of all time.
Peter Jackson, you sly bastard. I expected a little bit more out of the dude who went on to give us the Lord of the Rings films. Now don't get me wrong, the dark humor in Dead Alive is great, and the gross out moments are really effective. But the whole movie is filmed like a freaking early 90s Sega Genesis commercial. Our protagonist is really weak, which becomes annoying rather quickly. There's even a zombie baby they include in the movie, and who doesn't love a little brain-eating zombie bundle of joy? But of course they go way too over the top with it, like they do with everything else in the movie, and that even becomes annoying. If you want great gore with some dark humor, Dead Alive is definitely going to deliver, but it's going to over-deliver in my book.
Number 6. Again expanding the definition of what counts as a zombie, the found footage feature Wreck would prove to be one of the finest of the subgenre. A Catalonian production released in 2008, the movie documents a late-night editorial show that become trapped inside an apartment building whose residents become infected with a maniacal thirst for blood. Starring real-life reporter Manuela Velasco, we witness the carnage through the eyes of her cameraman Pablo, creating an unparalleled experience in intense horror and capturing every moment of gory insanity that builds to one of the most unnerving final scenes in the history of horror. Spawning its own franchise, Wreck is possibly the most immersive picture in the genre, and stands as an outstanding contribution to the zombie universe, which many believe to be the greatest found footage movie of them all.
Who wants a recipe for crapping their pants while watching a horror movie? You do? Well, just combine zombies with found footage and boom, there you go. Grab your Huggies and go to town, my friends, because Wreck is a found footage masterpiece. It's wild how you feel sucked right into the movie with the characters. Our protagonist is a reporter, and through her, you're drawn into the mystery in a way that you aren't in most zombie flicks. Most make the cause pretty clear fairly early on, but Wreck really makes you wonder what's really happening with these people and why. And the payoff is really unique. Just one more thing to love about this movie.
Number 5. From the legendary horror author H.P. Lovecraft comes his retelling of the tale of Frankenstein, Reanimator. Having discovered a serum that brings life to the dead, the movie documents the experiments of the delightfully twisted Dr. West. Performed by the legendary Jeffrey Combs in possibly his most iconic role, the story follows his increasing lack of sanity as he strives to protect the serum from his scientific nemesis Dr. Hill, played by the late and criminally underappreciated David Gale. Showcasing the peak of practical effects of the era, the darkest of humor, and produced by schlockmaster Brian Usna, the movie was instantly heralded as the greatest adaptation of Lovecraft's literature, a title which is still held to this day. And despite its parallels with Frankenstein, Reanimator stands on its own, not only as an outstanding zombie movie, but also one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies of the 1980s.
So, what do you do when you want to save lives? Well, you can either become a doctor like good old Dan, or you can become a mad scientist like Herbert West. I love this movie and how these two characters essentially want to accomplish the same thing, but they do it in very different ways. The movie is fun, it's funny, there's green goo and a syringe, there's a reanimated dead cat, and the antagonist at one point essentially becomes a reanimated head who still tries to move forward with his evil plan, which eventually leads to him being able to kidnap the girl of his dreams. It's so silly and so fun, Reanimator will reanimate your love for horror.
Number 4. Again inspired by the work of George A. Romero, Return of the Living Dead would push the zombie lore to the absolute extreme, presenting the creature not as a single entity, but as a cellular intelligence, allowing for dismembered body parts to become separate and individual antagonists, breaking all pre-established rules to create the most indestructible envisioning scene in cinema. Directed by Dan O'Bannon, and starring a host of B-movie royalty, including legendary scream queen Linnea Quigley, the movie would also feature some of the most impressive practical effects of its time and become the epitome of 80s trash horror. Spawning its own franchise, Return of the Living Dead is recognized as one of the most iconic 80s schlock horror movies and arguably the most enjoyably chaotic and rock and roll picture of the entire genre.
Return of the Living Dead. I like it, spooky. Is it just me, or is this one of those films that you just want to be a part of? It looks like everyone is having so much fun. Seriously, whether it's the teens that just want to get together and have a party in a cemetery, or the numbskulls working at a freaking medical supply warehouse, it looks like everyone's having a freaking blast, man. You know, even though there are hordes of zombies running around trying to eat people. And can we talk about the zombies in this one? Even though this film is a comedy, these are some of the absolute toughest reanimated corpses you're going to come across in a horror film. They're intelligent enough to speak and even manipulate the living into feeding them. If you want a movie that's fun, scary, and funny all at the same time, well, you found it in this one. Just remember, this isn't a movie, it's a way of life.
Number 3. The newest movie on this list, as recent as 2016, is a testament to the greatness of Train to Busan. A first-time picture by anime director Yeon Sang-ho, the movie follows an estranged father and daughter as they travel to meet her mother when a zombie outbreak plagues the country. Taking place almost entirely on the train, the incurred claustrophobia and intensity are only amplified. Despite the intense action and notable horror, the standout feature of the movie is its astounding character development, creating a rarely seen protagonist attachment that arguably makes for the most heartfelt and emotional narrative of the entire subgenre. Winning 10 awards including Best Film and Best New Director, and also receiving the anime feature Seoul Station and the sequel Peninsula, Train to Busan is a movie bound for classic status.
Oh man, where to even start with Train to Busan? Seriously, this movie has some amazing character development. You're going to fall in love with them and even despise some of them. But either way, you're going to feel something for every person in this movie. It's also incredible to watch some of these characters grow into everything that you wished and hoped they would become. It's nice that the plot has some meat on its bones, and there's more to this movie than just being worried about the zombies. Also, let's give it up for just how freaking claustrophobic this movie is. Jeez, these people are trapped on a train with ravenous, super fast zombies that just don't stop. Much like this movie. Seriously, once this thing gets started, it doesn't stop. This movie does not let up. It does not give you a second to catch your breath.
Number 2. Where spoof humor is considered by many to be lowbrow, cheap entertainment, Shaun of the Dead proved that parody can also be respectful and praising. Starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost as two have-a-go hero nobodies who overlook the zombie apocalypse, upon realizing, take matters into their own hands to save Shaun's family and try to win back his recently ex-girlfriend. Serving as a love letter to the movies that inspired them as filmmakers, Edgar Wright would pepper the movie with countless homages to his inspirations, making for an equally entertaining Easter egg hunt. Perfectly blending romance, zombies, and comedy, the self-proclaimed rom-com is also considered one of the most important movies of the early 2000s, being the first comedy to top the box office in the wake of 9/11. Still a beloved movie to all walks of cinemagoers, Shaun of the Dead is unquestionably one of the most funny, most charming, and most respectful horror comedies of them all.
Shaun of the Dead makes you want to go to the pub, have a pint, and wait for all of this to blow over. Seriously, while watching this movie, you're going to be thinking about how much you would like to be friends with these guys and have a beer with them. It's one of those movies where you can easily put yourself in the protagonist's shoes. These are a couple of goofball friends that are just trying to survive a zombie apocalypse as well as a broken heart the best way they know how, while navigating through life and all of its mundane tasks, while also trying to avoid those pesky flesh-eating zombies. It's a juggling act, but these clowns can handle it.
Before we get to number 1, if you enjoyed Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. And a huge shout out to Travis Colvard and also to Ken Day Jones as my top tier patron. Number 1. What George Romero began with Night of the Living Dead, he perfected with the 1978 sequel, Dawn of the Dead. Continuing his trademark social cynicism, he would write the story as a mockery of the materialistic world, following the survivors of the zombie apocalypse as they attempt to exist and confined within a shopping mall. Making full benefit of a Hollywood budget and employing FX master Tom Savini to create the most iconic envisioning of the zombie, the picture would also be the first time that a zombie movie would be considered a worldwide success. Also inspiring countless movies to be suffixed with the Off the Dead title, including its own franchise and a respectful remake in 2004. The movie has surpassed all expectation to become one of the most quintessential pieces in horror history. Pleasing almost all walks of cinema lover and serving as an exemplary statement against consumerism, Dawn of the Dead is not only one of the greatest horror movies, but also one of the greatest movies of all time.
Why are they blue? But seriously, you have to expect Dawn of the Dead to be the number 1 zombie flick on a lot of people's lists. It's the ultimate fantasy scenario. Remember when you were a kid and you used to fantasize about being able to spend the entire night in a mall? Well, these people get to live that dream. And why wouldn't they? They're in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. A mall is going to offer shelter, food, water, and Orange Julius. It's just as fun as it sounds. But eventually you have to remember why they're there, and so do they, which leads to a dire situation. Also, let's give it up to Tom Savini's mustache, which makes an epic appearance.
So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which zombie movies do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and a huge thank you to Talk Horror for appearing in this episode.
Now that we've hit the end of this video, I have to say that if this was my list, I would have made a few changes. Number 1, The Beyond would be out of here, off the list. So would Dead Alive. I would bring Night of the Creeps into the top 10, and I'm not sure if this counts or not, but Pet Sematary would also have to make the list. I love that movie, and if there's an inkling of the chance that it could be included, it's got to be on there for me. Overall, though, I would still say that this is an excellent list with some amazing choices. Speaking of which, another great thing I've had to bring into question while working on this is I've really had to consider what makes a zombie movie a zombie movie. This is a topic that I would love to dive into more with Demented in the future. Big props go out to Demented for allowing me to participate in this amazing video. I had a freaking blast. Also, thanks to every single one of you for watching. If you'd like to stay in touch with me and check out some of my stuff, come on over to Talk Horror and become part of the horror fam. Just don't forget to send more paramedics. Alright, stay scared, my friends.
Be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless. The reality of being a horror fan is recognizing that what is considered by the average movie lover as being terrible to be a highly entertaining picture for yourself, as the ability to see treasure within trash is a trait held only by true horror lovers. For too long now, I've avoided answering the question, what is your favorite horror movie? Simply because my taste evolves and forever discovering new movies. With alternate cinema covering such a vast range of subgenres, creating a personal top 10 is no simple task. As we're all individual and susceptible to unique fears, there will never be an all-defining list of greatest horror movies. Anyone claiming so has achieved nothing but egotistical speculation. Judging individual pictures by their own standards, today I'll be exploring the potentially thousands of movies I've seen to bring you what I believe to be my current definitive list. So join me as I count down my personal top 10 horror movies. For this ultimate episode of Demented Top 10 Season 3, I'm once again putting myself in the spotlight to bring you my personal favorite horror movies. There's no rules here, but consider this video an insight into getting to know me. So let's begin. Number 10. For many years, the zombie feature has produced many exceptional pictures. Released in 2016, Train to Busan would be the movie to fully rekindle my love for the subgenre. A simple tale of an unlikely group that share a train during the outbreak of a zombie apocalypse. Primarily following an estranged father as he accompanies his daughter's return home. The relationships between the unassociated characters is what becomes the backbone of the picture. Despite the outstanding zombie-based horror, what truly made me love the movie was its incredible character writing. Earning a bond with the viewer that leads to one of the most emotional experiences of its kind, ultimately making their plight all the more intense. Bound for classic status, Train to Busan is not only one of my personal favorite pictures, but also a contender for one of the greatest horror movies of the 21st century. Number 9. Back in my egotistical youth when I considered myself immune to horror, Shudder would be the movie to prove me wrong. Released amidst the boom of Asian horror during the early 2000s and being prone to a wandering imagination, the movie almost surgically targeted my forgotten childhood fears, which in turn made me evolve as a horror fan. Telling the story of a photographer who, following a hit-and-run incident, becomes haunted by captured images of a ghostly female, becoming progressively more insidious. The movie turns into a tale of mystery to discover the identity of the apparition before she begins to claim the lives of the ones she visits. A rare example of Thai horror, what caught me off guard was the proficiency in filmmaking, teaching me a valuable life lesson in decorum. Shudder is a movie that earned my utmost respect and remains one of the few pictures capable of genuinely terrifying me. Number 8. At first you may be thinking, why part 3 over the original? Where I agree that the original is the superior movie, Dream Warriors I find simply more entertaining. Seeing the return of Nancy as she serves as counselor to a group of section teenagers who all share nightmares of the dream demon Freddy, teaching them to take control of their dreams and become the titular Dream Warriors, the movie verges on becoming a dark superhero picture. Returning Krueger to his original agenda, for me, what makes this sequel superior are the outstanding practical effects, equally impressive direction, and also featuring the most imaginative and creative kills of the entire franchise. Also introducing a more comical Krueger, but not stripping him of any intimidation, Nightmare Part 3 presents what I believe to be the most definitive and entertaining interpretation of the Springwood slasher of the entire franchise. Number 7. As an avid fan of practical filmmaking, few movies are able to impress as well as Clive Barker's Nightbreed, an oddly beautiful movie that has stayed with me since first viewing it as a child. Adapted from the novel Cabal, the movie follows Boone, a suspected criminal who is turned into a nightmare creature. Forced underground, he joins a monstrous yet misunderstood society that exists in the underground city of Midian. Inverting the tradition of heel and face characters, the movie serves as an indirect commentary of society and nature. In a story of man versus monster with the roles reversed, what makes the picture stand amongst its peers is the presentation that justifies the existence of would-be antagonists. Sadly overlooked by all but horror fans, Nightbreed is an unquestionable unsung classic, showcasing some of the greatest imagination ever set to screen and truly deserving of far greater recognition. Number 6. As one of my original gateway movies, there are few to be as perfect an introduction to horror as The Lost Boys. Released in a time when teen horror fiction didn't pander to an overly sensitive generation, the movie would prove to be one of the greatest of the subgenre. Released at the peak of the MTV horror generation, and starring a host of upcoming talent, the movie perfectly blended teen comedy and unapologetic horror. Another notable feature would be the exceptional soundtrack, which itself became equally successful, bridging the gap between the gothic subculture and boosting the popularity of dark wave music to the masses. All of these elements combined, atop of the unapologetic redesign of the vampire, created one of the first pictures to ever have me fully invested. Still praised to this day, The Lost Boys remains one of the most beloved 80s movies in any given genre. Number 5. As a lover of Spanish cinema, my most recommended picture is 2007's Wreck, a simple found footage feature that documents a film crew trapped inside an apartment building infested with demonic zombies. Prior to seeing this picture, my opinion of found footage was that they were nothing more than a novelty. Upon viewing, I was fully invested in embracing and recognizing the genre, having just witnessed arguably the greatest example of the subgenre, taken by the combination of believable characters and vivid horror, coupled with the real-world presentation. Followed by the respectable sequel Fear Revisited, and expanding into an international franchise. The humble Catalonian production surpassed all expectations and is now considered a modern classic. Although a relatively short movie clocking in at under 80 minutes, Wreck is one of the most unrelenting and intense action horror movies in the entire genre. Number 4. In the first two installments of Ridley Scott's Alien universe, there's been much debate over which is the superior movie. Despite approaching the projects with very different visions, for me, the title goes to the director's cut of Aliens. Although favoring action over suspense, the inclusion of the additional scenes made for a greater, more enthralling experience over the theatrical release. Delving further into the evolution of the xenomorph species, the extra scenes included a more detailed backstory of planet LV-426 and added even more of what made the original cut great. James Cameron's direction and full respect to its predecessor was enough to either satisfy or surpass any high expectation, and as already stated in my greatest sequels videos, the director's cut of Aliens is the perfect example of how to take an already outstanding picture and expand and evolve it into an iconic franchise. Number 3. As you may already have guessed, being a lover of practical movies, it's difficult to find a more shining example than John Carpenter's The Thing. A second adaptation of John Campbell's Who Goes There that would be more faithful to the author's original intention. A nondescript shape-shifting life form that absorbs and imitates any other creature it comes into contact with. Despite featuring a cast of standout characters and masterful direction, it would be Rob Bottin's practical effects that would steal the show and make for one of the most visually memorable movies in modern history. Initially considered a failure, it would be discovered via syndication and the home video market, which evolved into a slow burn sensation and is now recognized as one of the greatest horror features of all time. And as one of the earliest I ever saw, The Thing is one I've carried with me for my entire life, and remains a picture that I only love more with each consecutive watch. Number 2. Recognized by the Academy as their current greatest horror movie of all time, I too share the love for The Silence of the Lambs. The second adaptation of Thomas Harris' Hannibal Lecter saga, this time assisting fledgling detective Starling to capture a most demented psychopath. Known as Buffalo Bill, a man who intends to create a bodysuit made of female flesh. Taking the reins from Brian Cox, Anthony Hopkins' initial portrayal of Hannibal Lecter would be so delightfully terrifying he became one of the most iconic villains in cinema history. Introducing dark entertainment for highbrow society, the movie was not only appreciated by horror fans, but also by cinephiles, ultimately becoming the most accomplished alternate picture in cinema history. Still highly regarded to this day, The Silence of the Lambs is not only one of the greatest horror movies of all time, but also one of the greatest movies of all time. But for me personally, there is one that tops them all. Before we get to number 1, if you enjoyed Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have your say in future Top Tens and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below, and a huge shout out to my top tier patrons, Cam Day Jones, Michelle Salin, and Cardboard Kenny. Number 1. Of everything I personally love in horror, there is one movie to capture it all. Fear, dark humor, gore, practical effects, action, and Bruce Campbell. Following a quick recap of the first movie, Evil Dead 2 continues Ash's story as he spends a second night in the Novi cabin. Supported by a much higher budget and an even greater enthusiasm by all involved, Sam Raimi's passion to create his ideal vision was finally fully realized in this masterpiece of horror comedy. I consider this the most unapologetic movie I've ever seen, created by nothing but pure love for the genre, executed to no perfection. There is no factor to this movie that does not appeal to my appetite as a horror fan. Even the effects that now show their age are still capable of holding a respectable charm. This is the picture that made me love horror and fully invested me into the genre. Without this movie, I may never have began my mission to discover more of alternate cinema, which ultimately may in part be responsible for the creation of Demented Pictures. So this one's for Evil Dead 2. Hail to the king, baby. So there was my list. Which are some of your personal favorite horror movies? Leave a message below and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless.